So again, welcome everyone. My name is Jackie Garlock. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am here with my colleague, Daniel Tan. Dan, I don't know if you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. You can call me Daniel, pronounce he, him, his. I'm the Assistant Director of Learning Innovation over here at McSilver, a licensed clinical social worker. And I also formerly worked in a lot of programs that experienced a lot of crises, and I had to do a lot of de-escalation in my work. So I'm really happy to partner with Jackie today for this webinar.
Thanks so much, Dan. And yes, I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the Assistant Director of Training Development. Also have done a lot of work with crisis and de-escalation. My area of focus has largely been adolescents, but I've also done work with younger children and families, parents. And so I'm really looking forward to talking with you all today and learning from you. So let's get started. Sorry, I'm trying to, there we go. So for those of you who have not completed the pre-survey, you should have received this survey in an email, and it looks like our admin has put this in the chat. Thank you so much, Leslie. Leslie is our CDAC admin person that is going to be helping us out today. So if you need anything during the webinar, if you're having any issues, you can always chat into her. And so everyone, if you have not completed the pre-survey, you can complete it at that link. Make sure it says pre-survey at the top. Just in case. We're going to also be asking you to do a similar survey at the end of the webinar. So we are offering CEs for today's webinar for licensed social workers and licensed mental health counselors. You must be present for at least 75% of the offering and attend using your own unique Zoom link on a computer. This is going to be actually for everyone today. We really recommend that you attend this on a computer. Will help you. We're going to be using some apps today to encourage interaction. And so it'll be really helpful to be on a computer rather than a cell phone or a tablet. You then can register for your CEs the day following the offering, and you'll get some instructions on how to obtain those CEs in an email in 2 to 3 business days. So, sorry, the slides are not sliding. There we go. So here we can get some instructions on how to obtain those CEs. Again, you'll be getting these instructions. Okay. You'll be getting these instructions on via email as well following the offering. But you can see here, you'll go into the portal, you'll register if you don't already have an account. And then you'll be getting a link in your email that will allow you to go into that portal to access that certificate within a couple days. And you can also always contact Silver, which is our partner for CEs, if you have any questions or if you're having any trouble with the portal or with accessing your continuing education credits. Okay, so sorry. There we go. So our learning objectives for today. So by the end of this webinar, the participants will be able to describe the link between trauma, sensitivity to stress, and escalated behaviors that can lead to crisis. We're also going to be talking about different strategies that follow a trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed approach to de-escalation and thinking about how you can use these skills, these different strategies with youth, children, and families at different stages of crisis. We're going to be starting with preventive strategies and then go all the way through what happens during an escalation or during a crisis, and then also follow-up. And that'll be that last thing. So prevention and follow-up. And we're going to be talking about how all of these things relate and are actually all part of our intervention strategy when we're talking about crisis and escalation. Okay. Dan, I'm gonna turn it over to you to go through our agenda for today and also to orient folks to some of the tools we're going to be using to help us interact today.
Thank you so much, Jackie. So we have a really, really well thought out presentation, and hopefully you feel the same by the end of it. We're at the welcoming and introductions part right now, of course, and we're going to do an orientation of different ways to interact. You know, there's over 400 of you right now, and you have all really conveyed how important this topic is for you. While the number of people means we can't do breakout rooms, we will have many other forms of participation, which I will orient you all to today after this slide. After the orientation, we're going to do a part on crisis prevention as crisis response, and really emphasizing the importance of really navigating a full spectrum of crisis, and really thinking about, well, what do I do now in my current practice? How do I want to improve upon it? With an understanding of the role of trauma in crisis and escalations through use of a trauma-informed lens, and through use of some approaches that we're going to suggest, and hopefully you'll be able to take back to effectively improve your practice. We will also end with a practice activity with a video, and then allow some space for questions and answers if we haven't already answered them throughout the presentation. And so we want to encourage everyone to really think about your key takeaways. Everyone who's here, please make sure you find a pen or paper, or maybe you want to open up a document for you to be able to type up your thoughts, and consider what are your key takeaways at different points in time. What are the practices that you would like to sustain, to modify, to grow? What do you want to consider pausing or discontinuing? What do you want to initiate and introduce to your practice? So everyone, whenever you see this slide on Write and Reflect, we're going to give you some space to just pause, and you can ask yourself, like, oh, what are my key takeaways? What am I going to do to improve my practice after having learned this part of the presentation so far? And we also want you to continue engaging with us. So participate in all the activities, raise your hand when given space to do so, use the chat box to share comments, helpful tips, appreciations, questions. We have our CTAC team here, besides just me and Jackie, to engage with you in the chat box. Whenever someone says something, you know, comment on theirs. When we say something that you find to be really important, emphasize that with us. We really want to be engaging with you as much as possible. And right now we have 420. So it's a really, really great turnout, and really hoping that you can all really engage in this learning process together. And because we have so many people, we want to divide you all up into groups. You know, this is going to kind of replace what breakout rooms is. We're going to do a different form of breakouts to really think about how we can put our heads together in a different way. And so we're going to divide you all based on the season in which you were born. So if you're born in the winter, you're group 1. If you're born in the spring, you're group 2. Summer, you're group 3, and fall, you're group 4. If you have conflicts about if you're born on like September 15th, if you're a summer or a fall baby, you know, it's up to you. I see people are really like wanting to showcase to us already which season they're born in. I see a lot of pride for certain seasons right now, but you're so excited, and we're gonna actually take you through a poll everywhere where you can actually then showcase this. So please go to polev.com/CTAC2024 for us to demonstrate this. I'm going to ask people to pause sharing what seasons you're born in the chat box, so that you can click on this link or scan this QR code. So now I see that the link has been posted a couple times, but we're going to give everyone a moment to get there while I stop sharing the screen. And I will now go to activate this poll. So everyone should now see a poll everywhere in which you click on the season in which your birthday occurs. And we're just gonna give it like maybe 10 more seconds for everyone to do this. I see one person's asking for the link again. We will be happy to share it. To click on it, if you Okay, I see like many people are responding. 259, 261. Wonderful. I'm gonna say 5 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's see where people fall in.
Yeah, I see someone saying in the chat they weren't born in the US. I feel like, yeah, this is very Northern Hemisphere centric, but you can make a decision if you were born in the Southern Hemisphere, whether you want to identify with your Southern Hemisphere season or your Northern Hemisphere season.
Wonderful. Well,
Wow. Okay. Pretty even divide.
pretty even. I don't think this activity could have gone as perfectly as it had been for us to have this. See some comments about like maybe having some more time for it. But I'm really grateful that about 300 of you were able to successfully do it. But please communicate with our panelists if you have any questions.
And we're gonna be doing that. This was just a practice. So in the future, we'll give you a little bit more time, and we'll also have the QR code stay up on the screen a little bit longer because I know that it's not on the screen, I don't think anymore.
Correct.
Uh,
1 second while I pull up the rest. And if you could add the next link.
yes, so we're gonna be using another app as well. You can see that Leslie has just put that in the chat. So this is going to be called, the app is called Padlet. So I guess, Dan, sorry if you want to.
Yeah, no worries. So this one is called Padlet, where you are able to answer a discussion prompt anonymously, where you can comment and like one another's responses as well. And we want to chat. We want to try it out together. So pay attention for Padlet because later on there's going to be different links, but we're adding the QR code for this one right now, but later on there will be different links. So go to padlet.com/ctac/hello, but also refer to the chat box right now for you to go to the Padlet. And if you go to the Padlet right now, you will see that it's divided into 4 different groups, and just introduce yourself to everyone in the group. There will be a plus sign somewhere on the page, and you click on the plus sign to add your post. And then once a post is added, you will be able to like it, you will be able to comment on it. And some people have already learned to change their colors as well. So as you're all doing that, I'm going to now share my screen for you all to take a look at your answers. And I'm going to say hi to all of you. So I see here that several of you have been able to post your hellos. Seems like everyone got the plus sign, right? It might be over here, or it might be over here. And people have learned to also change their colors, and you can do that if you'd like to. And then, you can also write a comment,
So it seems like some folks are having issues accessing the Padlet and or getting into them. I would say that the reason we're using these different tools is because we want to give different ways for folks to interact, and also because there's so many of you, we want to be able to see all of your comments. For those of you who are not able to use that, you can still use the chat to comment your answers. That way, I guess, also it won't be everyone trying to use the chat. And so we won't have so many answers coming in at once. So I think don't worry if you are not able to access it this way. You can still use the chat to, share with us what your answer would be. And it won't be, we'll keep all of those sort of prompts up so that you can still see them.
Yeah, and it looks like around 230 plus folks are able to access it. And so part of it is too, if you click on the link, you can feel free to read. You can be an active reader. You can write, think about the different ways you can participate in this, and be flexible with what you want to think about with regards to this activity. Just take what you can out of it and chat things in if you have difficulty doing the writing thing, but we will look at the answers together.
Okay.
Okay. Let me go back. All right, and so we will then begin with the first section of thinking about enhancing safety by looking at crisis prevention as a crisis response. And so, as we all know, safety is a priority in working with our youth and families out there. And we want to look at safety at multiple levels and really thinking about how we're personalizing care, how we are enhancing safety with a sense of well-being, both internally and within their environments. And we can more effectively do this if our care is trauma-informed, which also means that care is socially just to reduce the harms of racism, ableism, and other forms of oppression. And we want to really be attuned to past traumas and continuous forms of traumas to really recognize our own roles as mental health providers in causing further trauma so that we do not perpetuate harm, especially given that youth who frequently escalate or experience crises likely struggled in ways we are not completely able to understand if you don't try to understand their stories and what keeps happening. And this is where we really start to think, well, what is the link between the sensitivity to stress and the escalated behaviors that can lead to crises? And we want to try and equip everyone with some helpful approaches today. So first, let's think about how we understand crises as clinicians. We typically think about an event that has a high risk of harm to self or others, health, safety, functioning, relapse, and related symptoms in a way that's not likely managed effectively by the youth or family without guidance and support. And so when you think about this definition, think about how you might be partnering with your young folks about the different types of crises that you're experiencing. So really, as we go through this presentation, think about like, what are the different types of crises that you experience with the youth and families that you support? So feel free to share it in the chat as we go along so that your colleagues across the state can also get a picture and an idea of how to really think about this. And so when we understand our own clinical perspectives of crises, it can really be helpful to see how crises happen across a spectrum. And we think about that at the pre-crisis phase, the actual crisis phase, and then a post-crisis phase. And so essentially, we can see that there's two main strategies that we can take to address crises. There's this kind of like long-term perspective that focuses on prevention of crises, and also the responses we have during more short-term crises. And so today, we're going to focus on those individual trauma-sensitive and trauma-informed de-escalation practices to utilize during crises, but also before and after in order to focus on reducing the likelihood of crises developing. And so this diagram is for those who might be more visually inclined to understand where we want to fit in the crisis spectrum. And so the main point of this is to understand that we always want to maintain high levels of engagement, which of course differs based on your program, the population you work with, and the situations your youth and families are going through. We don't want, for example, to have low risk situations during low engagement situations during high risk situations. And it's more okay to have low engagement during low risk situations, but because we're working with young people, we always want to continue to maintain high engagement. So whatever engagement looks like for you, it is important to be engaged to effectively respond during high risk situations, but also to strive for prevention during low risk situations. And I see someone in the chat talked about if we're going to get a copy of the presentation slides, and yes, we will provide them within 2 to 3 business days. And so for many youth and families, crisis is certainly a form of communication. Crises are signifiers. They're cues and hints to us as providers. A youth in crisis signals that the coping and problem-solving skills are not enough in the moment. A crisis can also signify that families might be overwhelmed and not have the resources to address a difficult situation. And so this might mean that youth and families will come to you with crises that are not defined based on the provider definition. It might mean that we have to really think about how do we use a framework that can effectively and empathically address the challenges that they have so that we can help them resolve it, and then teach them the skills and to build resources to coach them through use of the skills and resources, and then to continue mentoring them until discharge. And so based on the past few slides, we're really emphasizing the importance of responding to youth and families who are communicating needs to us through crises, because one of the best interventions is prevention. In the grand scheme of things, of what happens, pre-crisis and post-crisis phases are typically of a longer duration than the crisis phases. We, however, definitely feel the intensity of the crises and their impact more. And that being said, we want to be mindful of the fact that there's lots of pieces of information we can gather, whether from the youth themselves, the caregivers and families, the referral packet, records from previous care providers. Through all those sources and through constantly learning about what happens through the crises we help youth through, we can work through addressing and avoiding the things that most often contribute to escalations. So where are the safe spaces that youth can engage in often? Who can take them there? How can you co-create them with the family? What kind of natural supports are partners while the youth is working with you and after discharge? How can you build respectful, trusting relationships with youth and families? Is there mutual agreement among care providers, youth, and families on the importance of self-regulation skills? Or do you have to work on co-creating space and openness to engage in such skills development? Can we create some kind of crisis or wellness plan together from the start to identify different factors that promote wellness, that help with stress reduction, that assist in exposures to triggers? Or do you have to preemptively create one for themselves to use amongst themselves first, while building awareness and openness to such planning among youth and families? And finally, we're always planning and strategizing with many important adults to really help youth achieve their goals. And preventing crises is not the end goal, right? But rather, it's a means to really thinking about something that's more important at the end of the day. And so while this training does not aim to help you with your comprehensive risk assessment skills, for the rest of the section, we want to emphasize some very important pieces of that assessment process to guide your strategies. And here we divide risk factors into 4 different categories. And Annabeth, thank you for really highlighting the need to coordinate with other significant adults when we think about how to engage in crisis prevention. And so when we think about the risk factors, we can divide it into individual, family, community, schoolwork, and environmental or societal. So for example, in the individual level, a recent suicide attempt is something that happens to the individual. It's a very personal thing. At the family level, perhaps there's a caregiver with high levels of parenting stress. At the community level, we think about school and work and other community level factors. Perhaps the student has frequent school absenteeism. At the environmental and societal level, perhaps we're thinking about, oh, there's a lack of funding for positive youth development. Racism is one as well. And so thinking about risk factors, we also have to think about wellness resources. And so we kind of intentionally made many more categories to really remind you that to really maintain openness to all the strengths that can really assist you in crisis prevention and de-escalation efforts. How do you harness the power of wellness resources to develop these protective factors that can reduce the power and impact of risk factors that are present, and then really help you build all sorts of strategies that can help youth and families do well? I see Denise really highlight natural supports and emotional first aids in really thinking about this balance between risk factors and wellness factors. And Kara, thank you so much for highlighting that. Let's not forget our wellness resources. It's really hard sometimes when crises and escalated moments get really, really intense. So we want to actually, it's funny that someone named Denise just commented, actually, this is not about you, but we chose to talk about this, Denise, for us to really practice just together a sense of what are the risk factors here, what are the wellness resources here. So I'm going to read through this scenario for Denise. And follow along with me. And as I read, think about the risk factors that are evident, the wellness resources that are evident, and we'll share them together in a bit. So first, Denise is a 16-year-old cis female queer identifying and biracial. She lives with her mother in a small one-bedroom apartment and has expressed that she feels stifled in her relationship with her mom. She spends a lot of time at the library's computer lab to get away from her mom. She has a past diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and trauma. Her medication history includes Depakote, Zoloft, olanzapine. She's been hospitalized twice, once for suicidal ideation, a second for self-aborted suicide attempt. Previously, she was an A student. Grades have dropped to C's and D's in the last year. She has a few friends at school and feels like, quote, no one understands me. She does have a couple close relationships with online gaming friends, though, and she enjoys watching YouTube and listening to music. She's recently started writing her own songs and uploading them to her YouTube channel and wants to move into her own place once she graduates. And I'm sure many people are familiar with working with someone like Denise. And so that's why we want us to think about, yeah, cool kid, right? Robin's a cool kid. Thank you for naming that. And so we want to really first have everyone think about the 4 different types of risk factors that Denise is experiencing. And we're going to ask people to share all that in the Padlet. And so we're going to share 4 different links for you in the chat box for you to so I think my screen sharing is paused right now. Oh, there you go. So in the chat box there are 4 different links, and so go click on the one that refers to your season. So the winter babies will go to the individual link, the spring babies will go to family home, the summer babies will go to community school work, and the fall babies will go to environmental and societal. And so what you're going to see on your Padlet is Denise and her story, but also your column on the answers that you want to fill out. And we can give everyone like 3 minutes or so, 2 to 3 minutes or so to just kind of think it out. Feel free to wait and pause and comment on other people's. If it's helpful, you can like other people's as well. And feel free to also chat with us if you're having trouble as well. So once
So
again,
post on there's a little plus sign that should be in the bottom right corner of the screen. So if you click on that plus sign, it'll allow you to add a comment. And so I don't know, there you go. So I'm in the individual one, so I'm seeing other folks. I'm seeing folks sign on. It looks like there's a bunch of folks there, and I'm seeing folks post things. Again, if you're having issues accessing the Padlet, you can also use the chat. So use the chat to put in your thoughts on any of the different categories, the risk factors you're identifying. So that's another way you can interact. And yep, thank you so much. I already see people, things coming up for folks, and we'll be sharing everybody's comments together, so you'll be able to sort of see everything that folks have shared. Great, thank you so much, everybody. And again, you'll see the sort of summary of Denise pop up at the top, so you can refer to that as you're putting things in the in the Padlet.
Yeah, and I really see a lot of active commenting right now. I see
Yeah.
people liking things. I see people putting things in. And so we'll give it like one more, 30 more seconds.
Denise
And
will
then
be showing
we'll,
the summary in just a second. We're
yeah,
giving everybody a chance to put things in, and then we'll be showing the summary. But thank you so much for mentioning that.
yeah, I see each season going really strong right now.
Nice.
People are really, really putting in their answers.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have enough. Let's
Robin is already ahead of us thinking about strengths. We are definitely
yeah.
going to be talking about strengths. We're starting with risk factors, but Marilyn, we're going to be showing you the summary in just a second.
I will show it to you all, right? I like so much enthusiasm for for the summary. Let's go. Right here we are. So I see a lot of you have picked up on the individual column. A history of suicide, suicidal ideation, aborted attempt, history of depression, anxiety. This one is very similar. So I'm gonna like that one. Feeling misunderstood is a good one that we haven't mentioned. Queer and biracial, yeah. So really thinking about the manifestations of what society has imposed upon Denise that make it difficult for her individually. Thinking about the medication history, thinking about the lack of supportive relationships, a change in grades. So as we think about these, right, like you can start to also understand like even though we have this kind of artificial categories, they affect people individually and the whole family and their impact in school. So as I go forward, it's like everyone is really noticing isolation, few friends, social support, history of mental health conditions, hospitalizations, and I'm feeling stifled in the mom, right? Are there other supports, right? That would be a good one to consider for what your family risk factors could be. I think the individual one, everyone's like really covered it. Struggling with like potentially all these um, different low income, right? Really good one to think about. Like how does an individual
Mhm.
experience low income? Um, ooh, Jackie, noticing anything else that we wanna add to this one?
I think one thing I'm noticing, and this is actually in a couple of the differences, is that folks want to know more, right? So there's a lot of things that, this is a small snapshot of this, young person, but there's a lot of things we don't know. Um, and so, and I think also thinking about sort of the implications of these different aspects of this person's identity across, what is her, identifying as queer mean for her personally as an individual? What does it mean for her relationship with her mom? What does it really mean
Mhm.
for her at
Mhm.
school? What does it mean for, how she walks through the world and through society? Love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I see someone really highlight here too, like, oh, being biracial. I wonder what experiences she has related to racism. She has other
Mhm.
supportive family members. Someone really also even mentioned like the physical stifling and the emotional stifling, right? Like really, really good point to highlight. People are really, really wanting to think through those wellness factors, which we will definitely go into. The evolution of relationships is so important to think about. Um, uh, and I see people really, really thinking about the mother's relationship past diagnoses, the stress on the household of not allowed income, what kind of services were received in the past. So really, really great to think about the family and home column. Oh, someone really, really dug in right here. What
Love
is
that.
Denise's support system like? Does she have close friends who can provide support? What is the relationship? How can I, as a provider, help? Right? Do other kids in schools give her a hard time about her sexual orientation? Like really
Yeah,
great.
I see that coming in the chat too. Folks worrying about bullying, peer pressure. Folks really also worrying, we've noticed that, there was a change maybe about a year ago. Like what had led to this change? Was there a triggering event?
Mhm.
And then also what was the response, right? So have folks reached out to her after certain things have changed?
Mm-hmm. And as we think about this idea of reaching out, like what is in her community, right? In her school system, in the caregiver's school system, work system. And we see here this kind of history that's happening with regards to hospitalization and engagement, right? Even thinking about the hospital system, how has her experiences in the hospital been supportive or not, right? What is this about the online community? Her way of connecting to kids in the school, the distancing between her and her community, thinking about different levels of supports. And so as we kind of go through this, we're starting to see the commonalities, relationships at so many different levels, stigma. Someone suggested an intervention. We need a safety plan ASAP.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
and
glad that this
so, yeah.
person mentioned that, because I think also, we often think about risk and protective factors in our work, right? With
Mhm.
any work. And I think one thing I'm thinking about here is, how does this also, well, when we're talking about risk, we're also, it's specifically here talking about risk of crisis, right? What of these risk factors are potentially something that might lead this person to have a crisis? And again, we talked about how crisis can look a lot of different ways. Um, so
And
yeah.
I think that really connects with this kind of developmental stage piece that someone mentioned, right? So transitions are so huge when we think about crises. When we think about like, oh, she's trying to figure out who she is, what she likes, she's feeling misunderstood. So as you consider those developmental considerations, when you think about assessing for risk factors, think about different ages, different thought processes, different forms of problem solving, and those really big questions that could happen for someone who's 10 versus someone who's like Denise, who's 16. And someone mentioned ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences, and the intergenerational nature of them. And finally, let's look at environmental societal, right? Supports are online, few friends at school. We're really thinking about this idea of the impact of who's around her and who is created to be around her, right? How has this hospital system impacted her? Why is it that the family has a small one-bedroom apartment, and how do we intervene on that? The stigma of being part of the LGBTQ community that can have a lot of bullying, the lack of understanding from peers, like this checking off of a lot of minority boxes, bullying, sense of belonging, community ties, curiosity for mom's history. We're starting to kind of get into um, the same ones as the other columns now. And so it's really important for us to think through the fact that as we consider all these risk factors, right, each one becomes something tangible for us to act upon, right? And so because we've identified that she feels alone, what do we do about that specifically? If she has suicidal ideation and behavior, what do we do about that specifically in our partnership? If there is a difficult relationship with her mother, specifically, do we do family therapy? Do we have collateral sessions with the mother? Do we talk about parenting skills development? Um, for academic difficulties, can we partner with the school? Can we figure out other spaces in the community or school activities that she can join for lack of peer support? And when we think about this idea of identifying as queer in society that's not often affirming, is there like a peer space in the community? If she is really great with online friends, is there like a really appropriate and helpful and affirming online space and in the community that can really support her and reducing this part of the risk factors, or advocacy work that will help her with her journey, right? And really thank you to everyone so far who's been participating in the chat box about really considering these wellness practices. And Colette, this really important question: are there cultural differences for Denise and her mother, right? We know that she's biracial. How do we really integrate that into what we want to do and support with Denise? And so as we look at Denise, right, let's actually now chat in all those wellness resources and protective factors. So feel free to type this answer into the chat box, and I'll bring up Denise's story again to make it easier for you. So I know we mentioned a bunch already, but please put it in the chat box. Claudia says, encouraging her to be her own advocate, Writing songs. She has goals, hobbies, and interests. She has online gaming friends. She writes music. Yeah, keep them coming. Academic success, internet savviness, has likes and interests, friendship, library time. Libraries are great. Academic potential, wants her own apartment, right? She has a goal for independence in the future. And so you're all really, really like, I was like, that's why. We all know that you would focus on that already. And so everyone has really said everything so far, right? The goals, the independence, the hobbies, right? The music, the gamer friends. Like, how can mom become a helpful support if she feels like mom is stifled? This is a wellness resource to really focus on, right? The library is really strong, but how do you then strengthen the school and home environment? And of course, we already mentioned the gaming piece. And maybe you can play video games with her. Technology, music, but also the value of independence and creativity that just runs so clear. And what someone said, she's such a cool kid, right? Like, this youth is amazing. I really want to work with Denise after really learning about her. And Patricia, like, I want to ask, like, has she got, like, what kind of feedback has she gotten from the YouTube community, right? Is she part of a YouTube community, or she's just a casual watcher? These are really important questions about how she builds relationships. Can we get a counselor to work with her, right? So really, really, really great. Youth groups, youth gay groups, right? Really important things. And thank you everyone for sharing so far. And so as we really consider these concrete risk factors and protective factors, we want to draw from them some really basic crisis prevention strategies. And that's where we really consider, reducing and managing symptoms, improving relationships, increasing connections, community spaces, clarifying and working towards goals. And you've all in different ways mentioned this already. And of course, for all of these, it's important to recognize the spectrum of skills and abilities from a developmental perspective, that some of you already mentioned, to craft the most helpful and effective interventions. And so when you think about these basic crisis prevention strategies, we wanna like think about the emphasis on the fact that crisis prevention efforts enhance crisis response, right? It leads to more effective crisis responses. And this is really done through focusing on what's important, on developing self-efficacy, addressing the most urgent risk factors, and really increasing a sense of control. So having all these elements will allow you to have more effective crisis response when such an event does happen. And these are about enhancing long-term safety. An important aspect is to really think about reducing the impact of risk factors that are more static and cannot or are less likely to change. So with Denise, she had a previous self-aborted suicide attempt. That's a huge one. We can't undo the fact that she almost had an attempt, but we can understand what it can mean and want to make sure that we mitigate that. A more urgent crisis prevention element is to make sure we understand how quickly things may change in youth and families' lives, and how quickly those can and will increase concerns about safety, including ideas about a sense of control. Any and all potential for harm are to be taken seriously to sort out how to manage and contain the sources of harm. And so Lou mentioned, like, oh, how does she internalize her experiences and help her find a positive influence she can have in her identity? She's young, relationships are and brain development are really crucial. And that is so important for us as we really thinking about reducing the impact of risk factors to strengthen those protective factors. And I really want to drive home this point about urgency, right? So let's think about Denise again, who had a self-aborted suicide attempt. Well, we would want to know what she had planned to do before she actually stopped herself from actually making the attempt. And so if we know that she was going to ingest a bottle of Tylenol, we want to focus on containing that source of harm. For example, maybe all can go well last night. You all had a session of Denise last night. And then tonight, her mom could go home having had a bad day at work. She raises her voice at Denise. Denise feels very hurt and upset. She escalates. And this quick change to her day now leads into a heightened safety concern. Denise looks for Tylenol to ingest. But we focused on this risk factor, which can really directly impact safety and highlight the importance of the status risk factor through our crisis prevention work. We focused on the self-efficacy in the process. We worked with Denise and her mom to lock up all the pills in the home to enhance their sense of control over a potentially harmful situation. And so throughout all this, we think, well, how do we remain youth-guided and family-driven when addressing such challenging situations? We're focused on engagement and incorporating protective factors that can really strengthen safety and make it less likely for youth to disengage from the team, family, and other important environments. And really remember, we actually had to engage with both Denise and mom, gain their trust, and help them work together to actually get to such a helpful intervention. And I see the chat box is really on fire, right? We talk about the things Denise is going through, but what about Denise wanting to seek help? Like, absolutely. We actually had to engage her. Perhaps she didn't initially. And then through our work with her, she came and the mom came, and together we really focus on how to make a change. And so when we think further then about all the considerations in the past several slides, your more safety-focused crisis prevention efforts shift a bit. So following your comprehensive, engaging and ongoing assessments, your strategies are to help with what we just talked about earlier, but with a huge emphasis on the strategies that are very intentionally focused on the what can quickly and directly impact safety, what can really strengthen and enhance natural supports, what are the strategies that can really be specifically designed to reduce access to sources of harm, including access to lethal means, and really build skills and resources that target circumstances that impact safety. And some of you are already asking the right questions, right? Like what events occurred when her grades began dropping from the A's to C's? Very important sign of a community level risk factor that we've noticed. We want to be curious and explore that and understand, like, oh, actually what Mary Jo said, like she stopped herself. That's a really big positive. How do we harness that desire to live a good life in different ways to achieve her goals, right? And so really thank you for your active participation so far. Let's do a brief pause. Like, what are your key takeaways? Reflect for yourself. Write down a note for yourself and how you want your practice to change. Maybe you want to strengthen something you're already doing. Maybe you're like, oh, I really liked the question that someone else brought up earlier. I want to use that question when I conceptualize care. So just take like, a brief moment to really check in with yourself and reflect, and we'll continue after a brief pause. And I will mute myself. And if you would like to share, this is your own private practice of improvement plan, so to speak. But if you'd like to share, please feel free to type it in the chat. I see some people are already doing it. Containment from a psychoanalytic lens. I want to improve Denise's sense of self and how she can impact the world. How do I help her as someone younger going through identity investigation? Shannon likes this approach. And so think about your approaches. Think about the youth you're working with, the families you're working with. Are the things you can take away from everything we've discussed so far? Highlighting, wellness resources. Really, yes, the specific risk factors rather than this kind of nebulous idea of what risk is. Emily is having a really good point. Like, I want to go back and really think through, like, oh, wow, there's various systems and the lack of consistency in mental health professionals. Like, let me focus on what that does. Caroline, Denise has become a trauma to everyone else. Like, we got to reduce that idea that she's someone perceived as a trauma. You yourself want to feel happy working with Denise and help her investigate a lot of this. Motivation, improvement, recognizing talents, categorizing risk factors, exploring and magnifying. Affirmations. All right, so I think you all are taking away so many great lessons, and that we can start discussing even more. So actually, let's talk about your experiences of escalations with youth and families, how you engage with youth and families when escalations happen, and what has worked well. So type in the chat box what you've experienced. I see that people are familiar with Denise's story, but what are your stories? What has worked well? And we want to focus on the well part. Like, what has worked really well?
And
Tell us.
what lessons have you learned? Because I think that that's the other thing is some of you have been in the field for a really long time and you've tried different things that have worked and then maybe haven't worked as well. So what are some of those lessons that maybe you've learned in your work, that you've learned from colleagues? I feel like this is sort of one of those great places where we all can sort of share with each other those tips and tricks that, or those, lessons learned that we can all benefit from. I also, so I see from Ashanti saying, allowing youth to fully express themselves, talking to them rather at them, listening, simply listening, staying calm, neutral tone, never making demands and being as validating and reassuring as possible. Youth voice, listening without an agenda, not trying to fix. Someone saying that school refusal is a really common source of escalation. Someone talked about the really importance of helping caregivers to get their own support. Identifying safe adults as a really important strategy, building rapport. That was something that really came up for me when we were talking about this, is just the process of helping folks to build those resources and or address those risk factors alone helps you to create that relationship with them, and also means that they're not just associating you as an adult that comes in when there's a problem. I think that's something that a lot of young people, it's like, you only want to talk to me when there's an issue. Working with the whole system, working with very young children, less words is more helpful. Thank you, Sarah. Quiet, simple language, really addressing folks at their developmental level and giving them what they need. Self-empowerment. Yes, we're going to talk about really the importance of helping folks to maintain that self-control, that sense of dignity. Validation, 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 leading with curiosity. Time. Yes, drawing out the time when there's an escalation. Utilizing strengths, knowing when to tap out and let someone else take over. Yes, Liam, that can be so key. And that really goes into that as working as a team. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. Not to project your aspirations for the individual onto them, right? So not helping so that their goals are theirs and not ours. Seeing them as a human being that's struggling and suffering, allowing them to be part of the helping process, tone of voice, breathing, building on strengths. These are all such great things. And I feel like it's almost knowing boundaries. Oh my God, yes. Dan, is there anything else that's popping out at you? There's so many good things here. And I'm thinking that maybe one of the things we can do is try and take these and put them into sort of like a document for everyone to access at some point. I feel like I would love to see if we could.
CTAC team, please, let's save the chat.
Yeah, let's save the chat for sure.
Wonderful. I did also want to highlight, someone talked about self-disclosure, right? And I think this goes hand in hand with the idea that high engagement helps with high-risk situations. And so we want to be selective about what we disclose, but also emphasize the power of peers in this work. So shout out to all the people out there who are peer specialists, youth peer advocates, and whatnot. And some people also really got into really specific interventions like breathing, checking tone of voice, journaling together, right? So really, really helpful. And so as you think about those strategies, how do they specifically connect back to the risk factor that is more urgent, or to the wellness resources that we can continue to enhance? So now while we're sharing all these wonderful ideas with one another, we also want to think about the other side of things, the lessons we've learned, right? Like, what has not worked so well in your responses to crises and escalations? And so we want to do a poll everywhere for this one, in which you can feel free to QR code this. Oh, wait, let me go activate it.
And I just want to say, one of the reasons we're doing a poll everywhere for this one is we know it can feel sometimes a little bit vulnerable to maybe like share things that didn't work so well for you in the past, or that maybe went wrong. I think a lot of us, sometimes think back on things that we did, earlier in our career that we, are uncomfortable sometimes to reflect on. And we also learn through those experiences. And so we wanted to use Poll Everywhere for this because it helps. It's an anonymous platform. And so it allows folks to share more safely. But we'd love to know those lessons that you all have learned, and maybe some of those more difficult experiences that you maybe wish you'd handled differently, or have thought about things that you might have changed, and sort of those lessons learned. So you can always use the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, but we wanted to give folks an anonymous platform to share as well.
And for this poll, what you can see is that you can upvote other people's responses. So if
Oh
you're
yeah.
seeing the lessons that you've learned along the way, and someone said something that you experienced, please feel free to highlight it, upvote it, get some, cohesiveness around this group. And I see a lot of folks are really starting to put it in. So we'll just give it like a quick moment for people to continue putting in their responses. Maybe like 20 more seconds. There's a lot of responses already, which is really wonderful. Yeah.
Seeing some really profound stuff showing up.
And I see people are definitely upvoting different ones. There's a very clear one that I see, but all right, 10 more seconds. And just to engage with some folks in the chat box, thinking about is there a pattern of crises events for the family or the customer? Learning about the housing first philosophy could be something to investigate, right? This idea of not arguing during escalation, sharing with families too soon. I've been there, reacting, avoiding, going to problem solving mode, right? This great segue for later on when we talk about how to approach things more mindfully, and to collaborate towards a solution together. So let's take a look at other people's responses together now. Let's go back to the screen. And it is so clear to me at least, that this one about feeling tired or feeling burnt out is so crucial. Like when we are like this, it's not so great. It can really impact us, and we're going to definitely talk about that later. And then the second one, saying I understand. Well, no, I don't. Because what happens, they will say, no, you don't, in different ways, of course, but they might say that too. Moving
Sometimes
to
less polite ways.
yeah, in less polite ways, right? Um, and we've all been there. Moving too quick, too fast. That's someone talked about that in the chat, like, oh, I got into problem solving mode too quickly. All right. Too many people try to experience trying to help at the same time. So really being thoughtful about like who are you involving in care?
And what's the plan, right? How do you know who's supposed to respond? And how are you talking about this with a team before, during, after?
Yeah.
Being
Asking too many questions, that's a really big trap that happens, right? This kind of a assessment trap, so to speak, where I'm just like asking to try to get the best, right? Trying to give just solutions instead of listening, I mean. Trying to push them too much to engage. And I think the framework I try to use about this pushing too hard to engage is this kind of compassionate relentlessness is the way I'm calling it. Like you're relentless in providing care, but you're being compassionately attuned to what it looks like to really foster that engagement. Beyond the scope of this training, of course, it's a future one I think we can develop. Making assumptions, becoming dysregulated ourselves, allowing the youth to feel comfortable, double-edged sword. So as we look through these, and Jackie, feel free to say anything as well. But we're seeing so many themes, right? Authoritarianism, wanting to fix things, the wrong timing, being mindful of my voice, validation in an invalidating way, losing patience. So actually, they're all starting to coalesce, right? Uh, Understanding, who's involved again, rushing. So power struggle, very, very important one. Okay, so I think this is a really good segue for us to keep going now.
Yeah, especially because I feel like a lot of what folks are saying is that I was not, a lot of these things, and I think Dan and I can also relate. I don't know about Dan, I don't want to speak for you, but I can
For
also
sure.
relate making a lot of these mistakes. And it's really easy to make these mistakes because when stress is high, it's hard for us sometimes to be thoughtful, just like it's hard for a young person to be thoughtful when stress is high. And so all of these different things, I really feel like it's such an easy thing to get drawn into. Is this about us or is this about a young person? So when I'm trying too hard to fix things, that might be more about my anxiety about wanting things to be in control, right? If I'm trying too hard to make them my friend, that means maybe it's more about my desire to want the client to like me. When I'm being too authoritarian, maybe it's more about my desire, again, for control or to feel like to be powerful, or maybe I'm feeling activated or triggered by what's going on. Someone said, people getting loud, and this is something I really relate to, right? People getting loud is hard for me. And it's something I've had to learn how to deal with. Somebody else might have some other thing that is activating for them. So knowing what's going to be hard for you in a situation. Someone mentioned tapping out earlier, and I feel like that's also, knowing when do you need support? How are you going to ask for support? And I also just want to say I really appreciate how much self-reflection and self-awareness everyone already has, right? We're going to talk about the importance of self-awareness and self-reflection as being, a really key skill in all of this, is knowing yourself and being able to essentially do internal work that allows you to then be available to the person in front of you to help them to mitigate that crisis and to de-escalate. We're going to talk now about sort of how we approach and see crisis, and talk about the role of trauma. It seems like from the answers folks have given already, there's a lot of knowledge in this room about trauma already, so this may be a review for some of you. But we're going to talk a little bit about trauma when it comes and its relationship to crisis, in terms of the relationship between trauma, stress, and crisis, and sort of how this all can escalate. We're talking about, when we're talking about situations that require de-escalation, where there's a potential of a crisis, often we're talking about people who are having really strong emotional reactions, right? People who may be emotionally dysregulated, and having a stress response. So that's what we're going to start out talking about, sort of why people escalate from this sort of stress model of behavior. So this is, some of you are also maybe familiar with this concept of the window of tolerance. So this is sort of a zone, a window in which we are able to optimally function. We know that, again, stress and crisis is a response to stress, but there's some amount of stress that we generally tolerate within a day, right? So there's things that are harder for us in a day that bring our stress levels up, and then there's things that are less stressful, and those things fluctuate throughout the day. The window of tolerance refers to that sort of tolerable level, the things that we generally can handle without our functioning being majorly impacted. When we can have some stress, but we can still operate optimally. We can communicate, we can relate to other people, get things done. When we are leaving the window of tolerance, that means that the level of stress that we are experiencing pushes them outside, and that means that our functioning is no longer sort of at that optimal level. And our brains have a stress response when that happens. Sorry. And this is, again, for those of you who are familiar with this, this with the stress response, this is a sort of physiological response that happens in our nervous system, our limbic system, which is that emotional center of the brain, sets off that sort of alarm system, and it prepares our brain and our body to respond to that threat, to whatever the well-being is. This is sometimes called the fight, flight, freeze response. It's automatic and instinctive. And this is generally when we're having a crisis, and when a person is having a crisis, and when they are escalating, they are outside of their window of tolerance. This can look different for different folks, but they are sort of, that they are not able to sort of optimally function in the way that they would be within that window of tolerance. Joshua asking all the right questions. Does this window of tolerance fluctuate? Yes, it does. We're going to get there in just a second. Before we do that, as I said, it can look different. So I'm wondering, using the chat, what does it look like for different folks when they get pushed out of that window of tolerance? Again, it might look different for different people, but you can think about what it would look like, what it looks like for you. You can think about it, what it looks like for folks you know, folks you're working with. Volume goes up, people become aggressive, they are isolating, exploding, or shutting down, irritability, anxiety, displaced anger, fight or flight, dissociation, aggression, freeze, countertransference response, isolation, yelling, crying, dissociating, self-harm, panic, putting a wall up, all great things. And some folks will, again, I love that people are mentioning sort of the variety. You have sort of those more explosive, external, that's sort of more fight related responses, but then you have the flight and freeze, the more internalizing, shutting down. And folks might display some or all or both. And you can see some of these stress reactions and responses on the screen here. And they sort of fall into these different categories. So you have these physical responses. Again, your body is preparing to respond to something that is a threat to our well-being. So we have this heart racing, aches and pains, changes in energy, cognitive response. It becomes more difficult to focus or make decisions, to communicate. Really, as we're seeing in the response, big feelings that can be anxiety, fear, crying, irritability, aggression, also that sort of numbness or shutting down. And then that can show up in all the different behaviors that you all are mentioning in the chat. So really great. Joshua, you asked, can the window of tolerance fluctuate? Yes, it can. We know that people's window of tolerance is different person to person. How much stress I can tolerate before it affects my functioning is going to be different from Dan, which is going to be different from, my sister, which is going to be different from my friend. I mean, it's going to be different person to person. Just because we're all different people, we have different life experiences and different coping skills. The other thing that impacts our window of tolerance is trauma. So when we have a stress response, the primitive part of the brain overrides the conscious parts, and we send our brains, our bodies into that fight, flight, freeze. And as I said before, what ends up happening is, because that primitive part of the brain is taking over, we don't always think logically, right? We're not in that more logical part of our brain. We're in that more sort of primitive, automatic part of our brain. And this is why folks who are escalated often seem to be acting illogically, right? Why is this person doing this that isn't even getting them what they want, right? It doesn't seem to make sense. And it's also why it's difficult to reason with people or to plan with people who are very escalated and who are struggling to regulate their emotions. So trauma is relevant because trauma puts our nervous system on overdrive. And what that means is there is this narrowing of the window of tolerance. And it means that it is it is easier for them to get pushed out because their window of tolerance is sort of smaller, right? They will have a stress response more quickly, and it will happen more frequently. The amount of stress that it takes to push someone out is not as much. And so people may react to things that, would not bother someone else, right? So sitting in a crowded waiting room, having to wait for your prescription at the pharmacy a little longer than you expected, having to wait in line, I don't know why waiting is the thing that's coming up for me, someone talking to me disrespectfully or rudely. For somebody else, it might be annoying, it might, irk us, but it would be a tolerable level of stress. For someone who has a narrowed window of tolerance, it is going to be more likely that will push them out of the window of tolerance, and they might find that overwhelming and dysregulating in that way. The other thing is that the reactions, because trauma really impacts our ability to self-regulate, it's going to be, which is again one of those sort of front brain kind of things, is our ability to regulate our emotions. Because we're not operating from that part of our brain in those moments, the reactions are going to be bigger, and it might be harder for a person to bring themselves back into the window of tolerance. I see people saying that this is a lot of information. We are going to be uploading the slides to our website, so you will definitely have access to those. I also see, someone mentioning how substance abuse can further exacerbate all of these. Yes, and people may be using substances to cope with overwhelming feelings that they're feeling very often. Okay, someone recently explained that they're functioning downstairs in a home where basic needs are and they need help to get back upstairs. Yes, I've heard that metaphor. I love that. I think that's a great way of thinking about it, is sort of like, what part of my brain do we want to help people to access? And we're going to talk a little bit about how the strategy, when we get into strategies, how those strategies are designed to help people do that. So knowing about trauma helps us to use what we call the trauma lens, or the trauma-informed lens, rather. Sorry, hold on, I'm trying to move my own thing. So, because this is not a trauma training, right? I mean, it's a training that's related to trauma, but we have other, I encourage everyone to check out the CTAC website. We have a lot of really great materials on trauma and trauma-informed care. So why are we talking about this here? Well, first of all, we know that trauma is incredibly common. So 60% to 70% of the general population will experience trauma at some point in their life, often before the age of 18, which can affect development throughout the lifespan. We also know that among social service clients, it's up to 98 or 99% of the folks that are seeking social services. There's been a number of studies that show that the vast, vast majority of people seeking social services have a history of trauma and experience trauma symptoms. So it's likely that when you're dealing with somebody in a work context who is de-escalated or in crisis, that person is going to be somebody who's experienced trauma. And so understanding all of the things we just talked about is really important. This is what we call this trauma lens. It's helping us to understand this person's behavior through a different lens. It means reminding ourselves that the person in front of us, the person who maybe seems out of control, that maybe seems to be, acting in ways that don't make sense, is someone who has had potentially a set of traumatic experiences. They have a narrow window of tolerance, and this is making it challenging for them to maintain their ability to act in different ways with intention, and to maintain that sense of control, and also to regulate when they're feeling those feelings of stress, of frustration, fear, anger. So some of you may be familiar with this sort of trauma lens. We contrast it with what we call the problem lens. This is often the dominant way that folks think. We are all sort of, in our society, we often have this reaction when someone is behaving in ways that are challenging, that may be a little bit frightening, or we don't want them to act that way. It is a normal response often for us to think, like, please stop, right? Don't do this. Like, I don't want you to be acting this way. What is wrong with you? Why are you doing this? The shift that we're going to be making when we think about is, again, sort of going from that judgment to curiosity. Being curious about something has happened to this person in the past that is informing how they're behaving in this moment. And they're not acting this way because there's something wrong with them, but they're acting this way because of the set of their life experiences. And how can I then respond in a way that is more helpful? So using a trauma-informed lens means understanding, again, that trauma is common. This is sort of just recapping on all these things I just said, that behavior makes sense, that people who have experienced trauma may see and interact with the world differently than someone else might, and that people need empathy and care, not judgment and punishment. Using a trauma lens helps us to stay out of judgment and respond to youth and families more effectively. So we're going to do an activity now that is going to help us to practice using our trauma lens. So I'm going to, Dan, I'm wondering if you could stop sharing just for a second so that we could, there we go. Great. Oop. Okay, so I have a couple of different situations here, observations, and what we're going to do is, using the chat, we are going to think about different ways of interpreting these different situations. So we're going to first start by doing the problem lens. And this is your chance to be your most judgmental self, right? channel all of those judgments. And, if you feel like maybe you're like, no, I'm past that, think about other adults that you work with that maybe are judgmental with the families, the youth, the children that you work with, right? What is somebody who is not using their trauma lens, might they think about this situation? What assumptions might they make? What thoughts might they have? What feelings or reactions might they have? And then we're going to contrast that with the trauma lens, right? Given what we know about trauma and stress and how people react, what is an alternative interpretation? So let's start with this first situation. Youth seems to be set off easily. They get loud and verbally aggressive toward adults who are just trying to help them. So let's see, what is a problem lens? Okay, I already say oppositional. And
Brat.
I'm gonna record these in the box.
Yeah, brat, spoiled, entitled, this rude child, ungrateful. There's no rules at this home. They're acting out of spite. The parents are just absent. They have anger issues. They're badly raised and they just want attention. I'm like, even saying it, I'm just like activated and
I
angry.
know, but
Like,
also like this is catharsis, everybody.
right?
This is a little bit of group therapy for us all, right?
Right?
And I
We
wanna
need
say
more
like
spankings, Jackie.
we
Like,
need more spankings. Yeah. I think that also I want to again reiterate that it is normal for folks to have these thoughts, right? Like
mm,
it doesn't mean that, they're a bad person or, but it's, you know, the behaviors we see when someone is escalated can often be really frightening. They can be
mm,
scary and they can also just be frustrating and annoying, right?
mhm.
Like why? And so having these thoughts is a normal part of having that emotional reaction. Who is their parent to find? I think of like things where I see, someone having their kid having a meltdown in Target. Like, what are sometimes I don't always have the like most trauma informed reaction initially. What's wrong with them?
That's
Manipulative.
weird.
Okay.
Somebody even also said like, oh, this generation is horrible, right? Like, and we're like for youth, they're like Gen Alpha now, I think. Right? Like, oh, Gen Alpha is like so spoiled. Um, you're going to self-destruct. I thought you wanted my help, but I guess not.
Tablet,
What's your problem?
a tablet child. I have to include that one.
You're just using drugs. You need to stop using drugs. You're
Yeah,
on something.
definitely. Oh my God, attention seeking, resentful. Yeah.
Who raised you? Who? Oh my.
Yeah. Okay.
I have
So
permission from everyone to say these, Jackie. I just want to let you know.
you must love to aggravate me. Oh,
Oh my
yes.
gosh.
Yes.
These are like hitting a certain part of all of us as we read these, right? Um,
Tracy, I'm really feeling for dealing with this in a public space is even more,
mm.
challenging as a caregiver. I can't like, that's really, really challenging. There's no way the child is from my loins. It is a quote. Love that. Thanks, Jake.
Share the quotes. Share the
Yeah,
quotes,
share the
everyone.
quotes. Share the quotes.
Share the quotes.
We're gonna have more chance to vent in our next situations. And we're gonna do, I definitely want to do a couple of these. So let's think of an alternative, putting our trauma lens on, given what we know about trauma and the stress response, what is an alternative interpretation of a young person who is set off easily and is loud and verbally aggressive with adults that are trying to help them? Lack of trust.
Yeah, oh, aces are impacting this. What do they need? Oh, they must be very scared. They must be overstimulated. Perhaps there's a very early loss in their lives, or they haven't had trusting relationships. What do we think about domestic violence impacting the family? Um, are there things to enhance the family skills, supports that the caregivers and parents might need? Should we develop coping skills? What's causing the triggers? What's happened to this child in the past to make them respond? How do we create safety? How do we manage the triggers? How do we get their needs met? Self-regulation is, I'm like, I can't even read quick enough.
Yeah,
There's
I
like
know.
63 messages now. Trauma, they need a safe space. They cannot communicate easily. Perhaps there's a death of a parent. Perhaps we need to consider strengthening the management of expectations at home and this idea of developing healthy attachment, this lens of really thinking about the need to fight for survival, the absence of perceived safety, communication skills to improve, a history of DV or abuse, Perhaps some of these are defense mechanisms. This is a communication of what's happening in their environment, or this is learned behavior, multiple complex trauma. Clearly, everyone is just really attuned to the trauma lens for this youth who seems to get off easily.
Yeah. And one thing also, just to let folks know, like I'm writing this into this slide right now. So when we post the slides, this will all be in there. I don't have the ability to put everybody's response in, obviously, but I tried to sort of summarize or to choose a select few. Okay, let's go into the next one. Youth generally does not complete schoolwork, doesn't pay attention during class. For those of you who work in schools, I feel like you probably hear teachers complain about this all the time,
Well,
probably
people are
most.
already saying it. They're lazy and dumb. They have ADHD. They're unmotivated. They don't care. There's a lack of motivation,
I feel like I didn't
ODD,
even have to prompt this.
right? This is coming. They hate school, poor parenting, lack of discipline. There's no structure. They don't value academics whatsoever. They're just up all night playing video games. They don't want to do the work. They're an iPad kid. They quote need a different setting. You just want to work for the money. COVID-19, oh, that's actually a trauma-informed one.
Yeah.
Poor supervision. They're up all night. They're on some drugs. Susan, I am having fun.
I'm glad that this is meant to be cathartic and
Fear,
fun. Yeah.
failure, peer pressure, no
Peer
future
failure and
goals.
peer pressure, y'all are really having trouble taking. This is great, although
We are
we
thinking
want it
about
to
both
be
timelines,
hard to take your trauma lens off.
right? It's hard, right? If you and this is where we also understand like the more we practice a lens, the more natural it becomes, right? So which aspects of the problem lens are we have we habituated, and which parts of the trauma lens have we habituated? So what do we do to shift it more and more and more to the trauma lens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this generation doesn't want to work for anything, have no goals. Yes. Okay. Let's shift back to our trauma lens. I actually, we've already seen a couple, right? Someone mentioned COVID, and
They
how
might
that,
need more support. The learning disabilities, bullying, they might need an evaluation for ADHD. Is food an issue? Are they hungry? Perhaps there's a low reading level they can't understand. We need to assess further. Are there trafficking concerns? Are they preoccupied with home issues? Withdrawing from school, household chaos, stress, depression, anxiety, PTSD. They might need an IEP or 504 plan. They're not motivated due to trauma. Maybe they're caring for their siblings. Maybe there's language barriers, asylum for asylum seekers. Do they need glasses? Do they need a tutor? Are their basic needs being met? Are there sensory concerns, right? So attuning to neurodiversity, poor sight, deafness, ESL, is there physical abuse happening? So really practicing this curious mindset that people are really thinking about here. Maybe embarrassment around their peers. They don't want their peers to know that they can't do the work. Basic things like sleep. Are they getting enough sleep? Is there an underlying physical complication like diabetes, right? Hypervigilance about safety, homelessness, nightmares from trauma, nutrition. Has anyone asked them if they're okay, right? Do they not feel well? I think we have a really good set of ideas from
I
everyone.
remember this is an issue the last time we did this activity, Dan, that I
So,
couldn't fit everything in. And that was with definitely a smaller audience. So,
yeah,
all have so many great ideas.
yeah.
Okay, let's do this one more time. And we're gonna do this for the last is that the staff at your program are continually trying to reach out to a young person's mother. We can be this young person, right? She rarely returns their calls and has canceled or no-showed for any meetings that have been set up. Okay, coming in fast and hot, Dan. I need you to.
Substance use, doesn't care. Mom's uninterested and selfish. He's using drugs. I work with this kind of mom all the time. Just doesn't care, expects everyone to be a babysitter. Her priorities are elsewhere. She doesn't care. She lacks effing interest. Does not want to help her child. She's neglectful in caps. No value in the child's education. They're selfish. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. unimportant, has other priorities. She doesn't care about her kid. She doesn't want to be bothered. She wants the system to raise her kid. It's all the child's fault. Why don't they pay their phone bill? She's not ready for kids. Those people, those people. She's partying too much, is too busy with work. Oh, that's actually a more trauma-informed one. This kid is everyone else's responsibility. He's like, oh, wow, no wonder her kid is messed up. She's too young and irresponsible to be a mother, and probably has lots of kids and multiple baby daddies. They're unengaging parents. Like all these problem lenses are coming out. And I hope that we as a field can really have all of us, our colleagues that we're drawing inspiration from, that we've met, a lot of people who've talked about the youth this way. I'm hoping that we can really shift towards the trauma lens wholeheartedly.
And I just want to share, and one of my earliest sort of jobs was doing in-home therapy as part of like a home visiting program. And I really remember, there was, clients that would cancel on me or no-show me all the time. And I remember, going to one of their houses and, confirming in the morning, okay, we're going to meet, right? And then be like, okay, I'm about to leave. We're going to meet, right? Okay, I'm on my way. We're going to meet, right? Yes, yes, yes. And then, I'm here. I'm not home. And just sitting in my car and crying. Because it's really frustrating. It's really upsetting. And so I also will say that like a lot of this, these reactions, because it does affect us. We are, and, we are affected by the kinds of behaviors. And also, how can we understand these differently, both also for ourselves as well? When you realize, okay, this isn't person just doesn't care about you, it can help us to be less judgmental as well. So let's put our trauma lens now. Okay.
People already started. It's
Whew.
PTSD. She's a working mom. She has language barriers. There's multiple jobs. Maybe she's a victim of a survivor of domestic violence. Are there cultural barriers? Are they living in a shelter? Are there mental health issues that are unaddressed and unmet? Is there anxiety? Is there too many juggling of different responsibilities and overwhelming lack of support? Physical health issues, like is there dementia happening? Is there chronic illness? Maybe the needs exceed the capacity at this moment, right? Like this is communicating something for us to intervene on. Cross-generational trauma, perhaps the mom's phone is disconnected. She's a single mom. Are there other caregivers that are available in this youth's system? Reminding the self that I cannot judge other people based on their own limitations. Are there complex needs with youth in the home as well as the youth that you're working with? Are the services appropriate for this family? Is there a disability that mom is experiencing and is unable to receive the support for the disability? How do we overcome a sense of helplessness, provide more support? Maybe there's a mistrust of the system, and that's a huge engagement issue to overcome. Economic issues, trust issues that we have to work on in engagement, communication, fears, working through personal traumas, or even continuing traumas and stressors, right? Time conflicts, right? Even thinking about something that's really practical and basic. Comfort with technology levels, transportation issues, negative experiences with providers, the level of education about things that concretely affect engagement in care, being tired. So many different ones are coming out, not seeing the benefit or the progress. So many different things to really focus on that can really assist with engagement. For us to problem solve and then to really eventually work through supporting the family for trauma lens.
Amazing. This is so great. Thank you all so much for all of these. And maybe when we add this, we can see if we can pull from the chat to include more of these responses on the screen. So I'd like us to think about now together how shifting the lens from column the middle column to the, far right column, helps, might impact how people respond, right? So let's think for this first situation again, right? A young person who's set off easily, get loud and aggressively, verbally aggressive toward adults who are just trying to help. So you all put a lot of different things in this box, right? It's being oppositional. I sort of tried to summarize what I felt people were going to say here. This person, she's so ungrateful and disrespectful. She never listens. And of course not, because nobody ever listens to me, right? And then a more trauma informed or through a trauma lens, the same situation, we might say this situation is overwhelming for her because she's been through in life. She's having a stress response, not acting this way on purpose, and it isn't personal. How does the shift from lens, from the first reaction to the second reaction change the way this provider, if this is a provider that's thinking these things, how might this shift change how they respond to the young person?
So it might allow you to practice with more care and a focus on strength-based work, and allow you to really put your energy into helping rather than judging. It
Yeah.
opens room for communication and empathy and compassion to really effectively be more supportive and validating and present with the youth and families, and even allows you to think more clearly, to better understand, to better assess, to be engaged with interactions that are more non-judgmental and more empathic. You also start to destigmatize, and you don't pathologize as much, right? And you start to decenter yourself. It's not always about me, the provider. It's about how I can support this family system, this youth, to partner, a more partnership-based approach in a way that's validating and therapeutic, to check in with the biases and overcome them as much as possible, to do deeper work, to build those relationships, and to promote positive reinforcement, and to understand where the client is going through, to letting them know how hard all this must be, and to really allow us to more take away from the personalizing aspect of how
Yeah.
people
I feel like Tiffany, and I think other people said that too, that's so important because often this feels very personal, right? I think about like, especially young people, right? They know what to say to make this hurt you even, especially if it's somebody you have a pre-existing relationship with, and it can feel very personal. And so how do we, keeping in mind all this can help to depersonalize it and, help us to stay in our own more regulated state. And that's actually like a really perfect transition because we're about to talk about sort of why that's so important when our response of what us staying regulated ourselves. So I'm going to, this is sort of just a summary of everything you all just said, but essentially a problem lens approach leads to a more punitive response, something where we are trying to control the situation, enforce obedience to specific authority, power, control, and it often leaves a young person feeling helpless, powerless, and shamed. Whereas a trauma lens is going to more likely to lead to a trauma-informed response, which is where we can actually meet the young person's needs, maximize safety, and also does preserve that sense of autonomy and dignity, builds on strengths, empowers youth, and honestly makes it less likely for crisis and escalation to occur in the future. We know that it increases their confidence in what they're able to do going forward. And also preserves a positive relationship with that young person or their family, because that's also part of creating safety. And Dan already talked about sort of taking the long-term view, right? It's not just about when someone is escalated or, if there's, a budding crisis, it can be really tempting to just want to sort of nip whatever it is in the bud and to, regardless of whatever sort of you have to say or do. And we know that part of what creates safety in the short term and the long term is also keeping that relationship, right? So how, if it wasn't about that, we could just like kick people out of the program, right? Just like, okay, bye. But it's not, we want to maintain safety for people. We want to maintain their access to care, to resources, to the relationship that we have with them. It also helps to maintain appropriate boundaries, avoids re-traumatization, which again decreases that likelihood of future escalation, and also it helps invest in their long-term development and skill building. We can help them to, again, learn from these situations, not internalize them as, oh, I can never keep it together. I'm always in crisis. I'm always having problems, which oftentimes is the takeaway for a young person. So I'm wondering, Dan, we're gonna give people maybe like a minute here to write down some of their key takeaways. If folks, you're again welcome to use the chat box to share some of the things that we just learned again about that we just talked about the trauma lens and the body's response to stress. And so if there are things that maybe you didn't know before that you're going to take away, things you hadn't thought of, things that you want to make sure that you take back to your practice, stop, start doing, change, etc. So again, take, 30 seconds to jot down some thoughts, and we will then move into strategies.
Really appreciate everyone's participation so far. So thank you. Ooh, so people are really sharing their responses. They want to utilize peers of lived experience to work with youth. There can always be a deeper meaning behind a child's behaviors, downstairs, upstairs explanation, and narrowing of the window of tolerance. Being aware of a person's physical, emotional responses to triggers so you can be aware of when a crisis is going to happen. Yeah, cognizant of my own expectations. The power and effect of readjusting to prominence, from prominence to trauma. All right, so let's continue. Move forward.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm seeing where I am. Okay, so we're now going to talk about using our trauma lens to respond to an escalated person. So Dan, I'm wondering if you could help us think through what does that mean?
Yeah, so we want to make sure we best orient our response to an escalated person to really ensure that we're going in the right direction. And to do that, we're going to be really thinking about effective de-escalation strategies that we can really utilize. Yes, thank you. And so in this slide, as you can see, we're really thinking about 5 strategies that we can use in an escalating situation. To start with thinking about self-regulation, then really taking on a more mindful approach that some of you already hinted at, really then talking about how to build in lines to collaborate on solutions, and then really, really having a strong emphasis on the follow-up piece of all this. And so if we, oh yeah, thank you. The first strategy we're going to discuss is self-regulation. And the self I'm referring to here is you, the provider. So why am I talking about your regulation when the other person in this situation is the one who's escalating? And it's because it's extremely challenging to regulate someone else when you yourself are dysregulated. And I think like the poll everywhere really conveyed that earlier. So if we go to the next slide, what we can start to see is what happens when frustration takes over. We might start to more so dismiss concerns and engage in blaming and shaming. We might really start to think about disrespect. And through that, that leads us to lecture and criticize and use a patronizing or sarcastic tone, which many of you called out in the problem lens, right? Our fear and panic will make us jump too quickly to problem solving, which you also talked about earlier, to make us try to just take control of the situation and really, really contributes to this kind of overall anxiety and discomfort in which we're like overly placating and making promises you can't keep. Maybe we start to avoid different situations. And what happens in all this is the emotional part of our brain, which is less intentional or less strategic, leads to everything on this kind of right-hand side of things. Next slide, please. And so when we think about this, to those who have really done work with caregivers in the past, you can really teach all the caregiving skills, parenting skills you want, and you can have a whole binder of parenting strategies. But a parent cannot regulate themselves when their child is losing it, so to speak. It doesn't matter whether they've memorized a whole curriculum. We really want to understand that a prerequisite for de-escalation is really allowing us to be regulated, allowing us to thoughtfully respond, and really thinking about where's our own self-awareness? What are those strategies that really practice in the moment when it is very hard to help another person? And then how do we maintain all that, right? So we're thinking about those three things of building our awareness, thinking about what we can do in the moment, and then talking about these maintenance strategies.
Yeah, Dan, I love that you brought up the parenting thing, because I think that, whether or not we all consider ourselves caregivers, we are in caregiving roles. And so just like parents who maybe are dealing with like a really frustrating toddler and are struggling with their own ability to self-regulate in those moments, it's going to be hard for us also when you're, we don't, it may not be a toddler, it might be a like, an older person, but it can be really hard for us to regulate when we're presented with someone who's dysregulated.
And so when we really think about this, the first strategy is to really build our own awareness of the signs and symptoms that we may experience when we're becoming dysregulated, right? These are the cues to indicate that we're becoming dysregulated and serve as nudges for us to take steps to kind of restore the balance, right? So rather than signs of wellness, these are really the signs of stress, the warning signs, the crisis signs we as providers experience. And so when you look at this, it's an example of how creative we can get when it comes to the tools that are really helpful for us. So this version, of course, is this kind of scale or thermometer of sorts to help us figure out where we are in terms of our stress level, sort of taking like our emotional temperature. So we have a scale that goes from 0 to 100. The further up the thermometer we go, the less we're able to think clearly, manage emotional reactions. And so if we even start with this kind of bluer part, right? There's more joy, less stress. You're most in control. This kind of middle darker blue indicates more stress, perhaps one of those days where you just don't stop and there's a lot going on, and your cues are like faster speech, muscle tension. At the higher purplish parts, we might start to feel more challenged, more discomfort. Our heart rate is faster, we're more irritable, or we're aching, overstimulated. And at the absolute top, we're in the most distress, the least in control, and we will not be able to think straight or communicate effectively. So this means that during a situation where youth is reactive, if our thermometer rises to 90, we're less able to think logically or strategically, and we just start just reacting without thinking. We become less likely to provide effective support. And as a side note, by the way, within our line of work, we have exposure to others' crises. And so we typically work with a certain level of stress, but we just want to be attuned to if it's too much and approaches as high heat, or if it's like strangely a zero and we have too relaxed of a stance and might appear numb in front of a crisis. So more on that later.
Yeah, definitely. So we'd love to hear from you about and someone mentioned in the chat also that this could be a great tool to use with the folks we work with. And I think that I'm glad that someone mentioned that, because this is true for clients as much as it is true for us. So we're focusing on ourselves first so that we can then be available to support a young person or an adult who is approaching crisis or is becoming escalated. And we can then potentially also talk to them about their own feeling, emotional thermometer or emotional temperature, you know, outside of a crisis. And we're going to talk a little bit also why like a crisis maybe not the time to teach a skill to someone, but this is something that we also want to use for ourselves. So we're going to give you all also a second to think about how you know that you are going up in temperature, right? How do you know that you are starting to go higher on your thermometer? These are some, examples, these cues we have here, but you might have your own cues, things that I sometimes think of these as like poker tells, right? Like a tell, what's my tell? What's my stress tell? And so we're going to do this again as a poll everywhere, because we know, again, sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable to be really open about how do I know I'm stressed? And so we want to do this, we want to do it, what's called anonymously. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Dan, you can share the results once they come in. Again, folks, hold on, link is in the chat, and you can also use the chat if you are having issues accessing the link. And give folks a couple minutes to add.
Yes. So we're gonna give it 1 minute, and this time I put a timer so people can know how much time they have. I really I'm pretty excited to share this in a minute, because people are really sharing and being really honest with themselves. And that is a really key part of the self-awareness that's necessary, the way that we approach self-regulation. We want to be able to understand what our own cues are. And this might be important too, to think about in supervision, in connecting for colleagues. You can talk about this with your colleagues and your supervisors if you feel safe. Like I always feel just like hot and shaky when the youth raise their voice, or I just really want to like, oh my, I don't know, my blood pressure just rises so much. And I see some people in the chat already really thinking about like, oh, my voice also starts to raise. I have racing thoughts. I end up really having stomach issues. I stop listening and focusing on my response to what they are saying. I've cotton mouth, right? That kind of like dryness. It's almost like, oh, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Like my body is really responding here. So as we wind down to the last 15 seconds of people putting in their responses, I am going to.
And I love that people are giving sort of physical answers. This is happening in my body. This is what's happening with my emotions. And also thoughts, Carmen saying, I can't do this. That's like the recurring thought, right? I feel like, and then also behaviors, right? Again, that like hand usage, raising your voice. Okay. And then Dan, whenever you get ready, you want to share your screen and let us know sort of what folks said.
I am sharing now. I could not share the presenter mode.
Okay, well, we
There's
can
so many people responding, but
there's a black box over the word cloud, so I'm wondering if we can move that.
how about
So
now?
you can see, no, there's another black box,
Oh,
sorry.
that's weird.
It's right, oh, it's right there. I don't know what's
weird. Oh, how about, okay, there you go. Can you see this?
yeah, but the black box is still there.
Oh, please move this window. How strange is that? Oh, I won't do that then. Thank you for the patience, everyone. Okay, how about now?
Yes, much better. Oh, it's very small, but I'm wondering if maybe you can read us out some highlights.
Yeah, so the big one is heart. And I just connect with that. There's kind of like stress and pain in our heart whenever we're in these like really difficult situations. Feelings, increased, racing, our shaky voice, the feelings in our bodies, our voices change, our expressions change. There's a sense of trouble, a tenseness, a shortness. Our language and expression changes. We become more tense. So doubt kicks in, dizziness, lostness, disconnection, a lot of different themes that really happen when we become dysregulated. So really thank you for really sharing all these with us. And so as we think about these like dysregulation pieces, we also want to think like, whoa, how do you regulate in the moment? Like, what are your strategies to regulate in the moment? Like, put it in the chat box. In the chat box.
Breathe, taking very deep breaths, people talking about breathing, music, woosah, grounding, deep resting, silent, cold water, fresh air, mindfulness, using a fidget, going for a run, sensory items. Yes, this is my one that I always talk about is I have like a very minty chapstick, and I really just like the sensation and the tingling and the smell, I find really helpful for grounding. So that's
So
my little.
these all really are moments that serve as reminders, right? To not get caught up in overanalysis that can lead us to judgment, to blame ourselves, blame other people. Doing these strategies can really help us reduce our stress, and deal with our triggers in the moment, right? So we want to really notice, I went from a 30 to an 80. Like, what are these steps to lower my emotional temperature, to reduce my dysregulation? So I
Because
appreciate everyone really sharing.
And I think that a lot of us have stress relief that we can do sort of whenever, but if you're in front of somebody you're working with, you can't always go
Mhm.
do your full stress de-stressing routine, right? You can't
Mhm.
just be like, hey, I'm going to go talk to my supervisor for 20 minutes and then I'll be back,
Yeah.
right? And so how can you do it in the moment? What is something you can do when you can feel that temperature rising and you have someone in front of you?
For me, I like to do these kind of subtle stretches, just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
breathing deeply without making it seem like a sigh. And I repeat to myself, my personal mantra is about like, here to listen. I'm here to prioritize safety and to really just understand that this is likely communicating some sort of need, stressor, or manifestation of trauma.
This is not about me.
Mhm.
That's the mine. Like, it's not about me. This isn't about me.
Yeah, and as we really try to understand like what we need to do in the moment, we also need to help us stay regulated before and after an escalation,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
do you have those strategies that you use before and after dealing with a crisis? And if you do, you have what we call prevention or maintenance strategies, which are like putting deposits in the bank so you can make withdrawals when you need to. So share in the chat box what you do before and after an escalation. And sometimes we talk about this as self-care, and I don't really love this term, mostly because it seems like it's all on you, when we know that isn't how we maintain our wellness or ability to tolerate stress. It's about something that's both about us, but also our relationships with others and how the organizations we work within structure our time and work. So send those things, and I see people really putting things in already. Music, hiking in nature, releasing a good cry, spending time with friends, fresh air, mindfulness, yoga, taking a shower or a bath, venting with your supervisor, talking to your partner, supervision. In some of my past work as a supervisor, hosting group supervision or in staff meetings, we sometimes started or ended some with someone guiding us through practicing some of these strategies to showcase our mutual prioritization of one another's wellness. And it was just honestly really great to listen to a song together, to take some time to remind each other the value of time off, to drink some tea together, as someone mentioned, to do some meditation together, among some other things. So really, really great list that everyone's talking about right now.
I like to
And
think
so,
of these as making deposits in the bank so that you can make withdrawals when you need to, right? We don't want to have an overdraft fee, right? We don't want to, but sometimes you're going to need to draw on those emotional resources in moments of high stress, whether it's moments of crisis and de-escalation or other moments of high stress. And so these are like putting deposits in the bank, right? Every time we, do something that fills us up, that makes us feel, our best selves, that's a deposit that we put in the bank. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like sometimes it's hard to prioritize it, because it doesn't feel like super immediate in the moment. And also it is, because then we might get to a point where we try to make a withdrawal and we don't really have those resources available to us. And that's when we can feel overwhelmed, we feel burned out, all of those things that we talked about earlier.
as we've talked so much about self-awareness, self-regulation, strategies and whatnot that you can use when there's an escalation going on and you're in front of a youth, but also before and after, think about what your key takeaways are from this section. What is important for you to reflect on and build to improve your own self-regulation and self-awareness, and to improve your skillfulness in really challenging situations to get you through this difficult situation with the youth. We want both of you, to really be in a good place by the end of an escalation. So just, take like, 30 seconds or so to write down for yourself, like, what are your takeaways from this section? And then we will move on. And someone mentioned, I'm gonna borrow the mantra, "This is not about me."
It's helpful for me at least, right? It might not work for everybody, but I find it really helpful.
Self-awareness is important, being mindful and self-aware of yourself to then practice with others. Self-care is key. Tips on developing a personal mantra. That
Mm,
seems like a really good activity with your supervisor and even with your youth
yeah.
to do together.
I
Check
also
this
think
out.
that one thing I will say is that when I started doing this sort of like mantra kind of thing, it felt really silly. I was like, and I sort of felt like, I'm like, this is dumb. This isn't going to work. And I think one of those things is like giving it some time and also trying out different ones because you might find ones that resonate with you and that don't resonate with you. And you don't always know which ones are going to work and which ones don't work. So those are the only two tips I think I have for it. But I agree with Dan. I think that would be a great group supervision or team meeting activity.
So we are at this point in which we can take a very quick break. So we can see you all again in about 5 minutes. Take a bio break, a snack, something to drink, get some fresh air, as some of you have mentioned. So we'll see you again in 5 minutes.
So it's 2:27 Eastern time right now. So we'll come back at 2:32.
Like magic, Jackie. That was like perfect timing. Welcome back. Oh, and yes, Stephanie, we are going to provide copy of the slides and the video recording in 2 to 3 business days. You're welcome. So let me pull up the slides. 1 second. Here we go, starting with strategy number 2. So in terms of, yes, you got your coffee. Let's keep this going. Yes, let's keep going. So in terms of self-regulation, coffee helps with some folks, right? We know that staying regulated helps us really mindfully and effectively intervene in escalating situations. And especially when things are more urgent and when we need to bring our own effectiveness skills into a difficult situation. And we think about when people experience trauma, they're more likely to perceive people, places, and situations as more dangerous or threatening. And our regulation really ends up helping an escalated person become more regulated themselves, because research has shown that our brains instinctively mirror the emotional states of the people around us. And that's why it's so dysregulating to be around a person who's escalated, and conversely, why being around a person who's calm and collected can have a regulating effect. So once we are regulated, we want to ensure that we are approaching the escalated situation in a way that makes the person feel safe, feel regulated, and does not trigger or further escalate the situation. And it's critical that even before we say anything to an escalated person, that we're being thoughtful about how we're communicating safety, which means paying attention to our body language, our tone of voice, and our physical environment. So let's first think about body language. From your perspective, what kind of body language do you think would help a person feel most safe and most calming? Whoops, thanks, Jackie.
Spoilers, it's fine.
Share in the chat. Yeah, open posture, being at eye level, good eye contact, but also recognizing what eye contact can do to people, and being cognizant of that, not crossing arms, watching your hand placement of your hands down and arms down, being mindful of your facial reaction. Open 45-degree angle, but not a direct stance. It's kind of openness, right? Leaning in, a relaxation. So people are really getting it here. And we're offering some more, right? This idea of personal space and allowing for personal space, but really conveying a validation, that you're listening, that you're actively engaged, you're nodding, you're showcasing attentiveness, and really allowing for predictable movements. And then someone said, no fast movements. Avoid changing the subject or interrupting. And so let's then start to think about our tone then. From your perspective, how would you want to manage your tone of voice to help a person feel calm and safe? What are you thinking? Put it in the chat box. Low and slow, soft.
Love it. Low and slow. Let's go to.
Not too loud. See, that was like even alarming when I say it. A warm tone, a soft, calm voice, warm and welcoming, calm, steady, genuineness.
Yeah, I think that the genuine concern, right? I feel like sometimes it can, we might overdo it a little bit. They get like, oh, and then that can sometimes feel a little disingenuous. So, right, being aware of, being genuine about it, right? You want to sound interested, but not a little bit, don't overdo it.
And we have that here, right? Low and slow, interest, empathy, genuine, warm, and just an awareness of what are you emphasizing and inflecting in the words that you're using. And so, yeah, not robotic, not in a judgy tone. I think like we kind of know what we might be meaning when we say that. So what about physical environment? You may or may not have control over the environment where you're providing services, depending on your program. But what are the considerations for physical environment that you want to take into account? So we have low lighting, temperature, being aware of privacy, thinking about the way eye contact shows up, thinking about the tone of the space. Is it comforting? Is it welcoming? Right? Someone really emphasized this kind of moan therapy technique that was mentioned earlier in the chat. Is there air circulating? Are there observers? All right, is there an exit nearby? Is there comfort? Is there a lot of quietness and not a lot of distracting noises? What are the smells like? And so, yeah, we have A lot of what you said, but really also, yes, someone mentioned it. Is it safe? Access to weapons, sharps, meds. This one's very important because it also depends on if you're in their home, if they're in the community, if your program is based on an office. And some other elements really include noticing if the space you're meeting in has a sense of openness. Is it cramped? Is it big? Is it quote unquote like more cluttered or chaotic? Is there a lot of color? And at the end of the day, we want to think: is it youth friendly? Is it inviting? Is it a regulating, safe environment? This idea of overstimulating decor or loud pics. I remember in one of the last places I worked at, the marketing folks were like, "Oh, what do you think about this wallpaper we're gonna put up?" And it was like a picture of a lake. And we're like, I don't know. We think about like what it means for someone who might be distressed and be inspired by wanting to jump into a lake, right, into the river. So we have to really be very thoughtful about the kind of furniture and decorations that's in the space as well. But really great set of suggestions so far.
I also want to bring up the idea of sort of like doing what you can and sort of harm reduction when it comes to this. A lot of us, so first of all, sometimes it can be hard to balance these things. I remember working with an organization where they had redone their space to have a lot of glass because they wanted a lot of natural light. And also glass is not great for privacy, and it's also not great for soundproofing, right? So even if they had frosted the glass, you still can hear a lot of things. And so some of those things, but the other thing is that once it was done, right? So the folks that, are providing services there now have to do what they can with what they have. And so I find that also, working with what you have and doing the best that you can, we understand that most people in this training do not have, architectural control over the places that they're working. You might be working also in a community, right? You might be doing, home visiting, or you might be going out into the community to provide services where you have less control of sort of over those environments. It's about when you can control these things, doing them, and then also doing some harm reduction. How can I control this? And then also, how can I be transparent about this with the folks that I'm working with? If it's sort of a cramped space or it doesn't really seem ideal, talking to them about it. How do you feel here? Do you feel safe here? Can we find another space to meet? Are there things I can do to help you feel safer? And sort of doing what we can with what we have. So I really want to, even if you feel like, you don't have control, are there things that you can change? And doing the best that you can with what you have. So we're now going to go into building an alliance. So we've talked a little bit about so far getting yourself regulated, and then also providing that regulating presence to the folks that we're working with through, again, our physical presence, our tone, and the environment around us. We're now going to talk to you about building an alliance. This is when someone is in distress, or when they're escalating, or when they're approaching crisis, they often feel fear and panic. And so even if you've been working with someone for a long time, they may feel alone. They may also see us as a threat because their stress level is high. So again, it's building an alliance is not just about we talked a little bit about the importance of a relationship in terms of prevention, and that's incredibly important. When we're talking about building an alliance, what we're talking about is when things are escalating, you want to make someone feel like you are on their side. So how do we do this? Hold on, Dan, I might need your help advancing the slides because it seems like I'm having some trouble
Sure thing.
with clicking through them. So from the perspective of the escalated person, as I was just saying, you may represent an obstacle between them and whatever they want or they need, right? Something that is causing them to become escalated or to approach crisis. They may see you as, okay, like I want to get this specific resource and you're the person I see as the barrier, right? Or I may need to feel this way and I see you as the person who is not giving me that, right? So whatever it is, you might represent a barrier to whatever they want or need. A key part of successfully managing that, lowering the risk of crisis and of lowering, de-escalating, is to assure that person that you are not their adversary, you're not in front of them or between them and their goal, but rather that you are an ally, it's not you versus them, but it is both of you all versus the problem, right? And so you're going to, be on that journey together alongside them to address whatever it is that they want, that they need in that given situation. There's a couple of different ways we can do this. The first is to encourage this person to share their perspective. So I'm wondering, how do you all encourage people to share their perspectives with you, right? How do you ask, what do you do to encourage people to share with you? I'd love to hear in the chat how people do that. You sit, yeah, showing interest. I shut up. Yeah, sometimes silence can be hard, but giving that person the space, eye contact, open-ended questions. Yes. Tell me what happened to make you feel this way. Asking them what happened. Yeah, just asking, right? Paraphrasing for comprehension, showing that you're listening, genuine curiosity, giving them time to share, right? So again, asking those open-ended questions, using those active listening skills. Tell me about blank, right? Tell me what's going on for you. I would also say that open-ended questions, again, for those of you who are less familiar, are those questions that cannot be answered by a yes or no, but they are encouraging that person to share. The one thing I will say is to be notable, to take note of, is that why questions can be an open-ended question. And also being mindful of why questions when you're talking about someone who's escalated, because they can sometimes sound accusatory. Why do you feel this way? Can sometimes sound like you're questioning whether they are entitled to feel that way. So just taking note of that. Again, sometimes about tone and emphasis, but just, yeah, someone saying, I hate why, right? So I find that just shifting to tell me a little bit more about what is making you feel this way instead of why do you feel this way, can really it's a small shift, but it can really help. Some other things we can do, we can provide validation, so communicating a supportive and non-judgmental stance, and then also centering the value of an authentic relationship. Sometimes what we can do is we can tell them this is where sometimes strategic self-disclosure can be helpful. So, sharing, that makes sense to me. That's reminds me of this thing, I understand how it feels to be frustrated. I've been frustrated myself, with blah, blah, blah. Making sure, again, to center that person's experience. You don't want to say, I know how you feel, right? We talked a little bit about how that can be really complicated earlier on. But providing that validation and communicating that lack of judgment, that can be really hard because sometimes we do have judgments about how the person is behaving and about their reaction to a situation. However, when a person feels judged, that's what can really make it seem like we are not in an alliance with them, that we are between them and the problem. So it really is critical that we make them feel that they are being validated and supported. It means not getting drawn into arguments with them about the facts of a situation or how they see a situation, and not sharing opinions about their choices that they have made. Like, well, you could have done X. Attempting to convince an escalated person that what they're saying is wrong or what they did was wrong shows you that you're not on the same page as them, right? Or shows them that you're not on the same page as them. It just is really going to mean it's going to push them away. And it also means not policing how they're expressing themselves. For some of us, it can be really frustrating when someone is cursing or using inappropriate language. This is not the time to police how someone is expressing themselves. If you can, follow up later, and we're going to talk about follow up. We can talk about those things at another time. Like, hey, it made me uncomfortable when you said this, but that is long after, these things come up. But we want to make sure that we are with that person, that we're not shutting down how they express themselves. It can be hard to do this when we feel like what they're doing actually is not okay, right? And so we might want to push back or disagree with them. So we're going to talk about how you can provide validation even when there are things that you might not like that they are doing or don't agree with. How can you validate someone without condoning what they are doing? And so there's 4 ways that you can do that. The first thing you can do is you confirm the facts. So if the person's saying like, I've been waiting here, for you know, 40 minutes and my appointment was at this time and I'm really upset about blah, blah, blah. You can, you know, you may disagree that like this person is late, but maybe you can say, okay, you've been waiting 45 minutes. What can you affirm about what they're saying? So, you know, picking out those facts and affirming that you heard those facts. Really, oh yeah, I see people talking about the future, right? What do you want? People are already getting this. I love that. The other thing you can do if you're finding it hard to find something to validate is to validate their feelings, right? It makes sense that you would feel X given what you're dealing with. So that's another second way. It makes sense that being in a crowded space might feel overwhelming to you. If that's a person who's, you know, in a crowd, for example. You might agree with the principle. So maybe a person is upset that like, you know, at the way that they were talked to, and you don't really think that they were actually talked to that disrespectfully, like, or anything was wrong with what the person, you know, how the communication happened. What you can do in that case is not necessarily say like, oh yeah, they did speak to you really disrespectfully or whatever. What you can affirm is the principle that, yeah, I do agree that everybody should be treated with respect. Right. So that's another way of validating without necessarily condoning or agreeing with what they're saying. And then the last way is to affirm the odds, meaning to normalize essentially what they're experiencing. I bet a lot of people would be upset by that. So regardless of sort of what it is, if you're sort of feeling like you're having trouble validating given what the person is giving you, these are sort of 4 like tricks, I guess, of how you can continue to validate them so that you don't, again, break that alliance. You can continue to sort of stay on their side. Later, you might process these things, but in the moment, we want to really maintain that alliance so that they can know that you are on the same page as them, and that will allow you to move forward together. So Dan and I now are going to do a very brief little dramatization of what this might look like. So we've got to get our like acting masks on. We're going to demonstrate each of these principles in a little sort of role play. Okay, let's.
I look thrilled for the dramatization. I was practicing all night. I was practicing all night. My lines are right here. I got it. So we're gonna go in order of what we Jackie just went through. And so as Jackie and I speak, just notice the technique that we used, right? So Jackie, I got suspended after getting into a fight with Jason during gym class today. We were playing dodgeball and he only aimed for me every single game.
That must have been so frustrating to feel targeted.
Yeah, and I don't get why Mr. Salerno only suspended me and not Jason when he started it.
Yeah, only one of you got suspended.
And no, and it's not fair. He provoked me all during gym class.
Nobody should ever feel like they're being singled out or picked on.
I just feel like I'm being punished for defending myself.
A lot of people would be really mad when they're getting punished for doing what they felt was right.
End scene. So after that, right, thinking about those different ways of approaching mindfully and building an alliance, what are you going to take away? Thanks for the applause. What are you going to take away? What things will you really do with the youth and families you work with during their crises? Do you notice certain types of validations you tend to do more and you want to try to practice other ones? Are there different parts of your physical presence that you really notice you wanna take on to improve? Thank you for
We
the
missed the deadline
Oscars.
for this year's award season. It's fine.
I feel so validated. So thank you. So take a minute, and we'll give you a minute to just, reflect on yourself and feel free to share after you've written down what you want to take away from this part. Remembering that you can validate what they're feeling without necessarily agreeing with what they did or how they handled it. Affirming and eye contact are essential. Staying objective and addressing the feelings surrounding the situation. And I just want to share a personal story. Like my work prior to being a mixover was in an early psychosis program, and I think sometimes people have this preconceived notion that it's hard to affirm and validate someone who might have beliefs that are not grounded by the majority of the people around them, and these are the types of strategies, validation strategies, that were really, really helpful in working with people whose beliefs did not align with mine when they are sharing their thoughts and feelings about struggles that they had. Um, I see some people are really thinking about the emphasis on active listening, that validation really makes a difference, the amount of trust that must happen, the role of motivational interviewing, really thinking also about the types of questions I might ask, or the type of style I have. Am I nodding too much? Am I saying sorry a lot? What does it look like to say, I hear you? And how does that land? And then, highlight to Jackie and shout out to Jackie for really being cautious about the words that she used and de-escalating me. I really didn't want to go beat up Jason after that, right? So there's like a lot going in, so I can't read it in time. But really thank you, not taking things personal, and taking time to yourself and evaluating yourself before you respond. Thank you so much, everyone. Anything you want to add, Jackie?
No, I think these are great. And I think, Susan, I think it's a great question. I'm going to save it for the end just because I want to make sure that we sort of can move on, but we will definitely address it during the Q&A period. I think that's a really great question. So we're now going to move on to the collaborating on a solution, right? So there's something that is caused somebody to be escalated or to approach a crisis. We know that when somebody is really having high emotions, is out of their window of tolerance, it's going to be really hard for them to actually be able to reason or discuss or plan with you. As the person gains more confidence that you are on their side, and as you are helping them to regulate themselves, by your being regulated and also by doing that mindful approach and creating safety, they will be more prepared to engage with you on how you can resolve the situation. And again, you do this in partnership with the person. That helps to not re-escalate them, and it also helps to prevent future escalations and future crisis going forward. And there's sort of two parts that we're going to talk about this. The first is is about clarifying what's important to the person, what that sort of ultimate, if you remember that graphic, what that goal is for them, what that need is for them, and then also brainstorming and evaluating options. Again, you don't want to move towards this too quickly, though the clarifying what's important, you might start doing that as you are talking to them and as you are creating that alliance, because you're asking them questions. Tell me a little bit about how you're feeling. Tell me. That also can help you to clarify what is important to the person and what they see as the issue, and what they need in that moment. So they may tell you directly, by the way, what they want or need. I need this and I can't get this, or I want this and I can't get this. But sometimes it can be complicated to determine what the actual source of the distress is. Part of this is because when people are escalated or approaching crisis, they may find it difficult to communicate, right? Using our words can be really hard when we are in that state outside of our window of tolerance. And so explaining ourselves or explaining what we want can become challenging. They may need support in it, and they also may not have a lot of practice sort of explaining what they need or want. And then also sometimes what they need isn't simple, right? So people have a combination of needs. They may have competing needs, right? I want this and this, but I feel like I can't have both. And also sometimes the need is just a little more abstract, right? So the reason I'm distressed is because I need to feel respected, or I need to feel like I'm in control. I need to feel heard. And I need to feel in connection with someone or not so isolated. Those are things that I think often people are not going to expressly say to you, but it's more like we need to read between the lines a little bit. This is, again, why having a relationship with someone and getting to know them, engaging people early and intensely, is such an important part, because you can know a little bit more about, maybe their history and what they might be actually telling you through their behavior. And And again, those open-ended questions you ask when you're creating partnership are going to help you to sort of suss out a little bit what is important to this person in that moment, what they need, and what they see as sort of the issue. Once you have a better idea of that, and you've sort of confirmed it with them, this is what I'm getting from what you're saying, you can go into brainstorming, evaluating options. This is the one you really don't want to move to too quickly. Oops, sorry, next slide. So this is where we can explore different options for addressing the issue and moving forward. We want to, in particular, I said, we don't want to move to this too quickly. You want to make sure that you hear and you understand the issue. And then also we want to give them a little bit of time to become regulated. Assessing what steps and thinking about next steps forward is really, future gazing in general is really hard when you are dysregulated. You don't really have access to those sort of frontal parts of your brain that involve planning. So we really want to make sure that, a person is really regulated before we move to this part of the conversation, because they'll need those skills to collaborate with you on what is going to come next. And we want to make sure we're doing this in collaboration with the person, because it means that whatever you all decide, it's going to be more likely that they'll be engaged with it, they'll follow through with it. And it also helps them to maintain that sense of control in the situation. So we know that for folks who have been impacted by trauma, feeling in control can be really central. They may have not had control in the past, their control was taken away from them, or they were, didn't have access to that sense of control. And so if someone is feeling powerless, they may be more likely to feel triggered or activated, which again, then can lead to further escalation or approaching crisis. You want to some other notes here is to seek solutions that allow the youth to retain their dignity. People want to feel that sense of autonomy and dignity, and I can navigate this situation and feel a sense of self-respect at the end of the day. You also want to avoid threats and coercion. We want to be transparent about what consequences might be and allow them to choose, but don't do it in a threatening way. So saying you have the option for this is what's going to happen if that happens, but not saying if you do this, then this is going to happen. So sometimes it's just a way of communicating things, again, being transparent about what options exist and what the consequences might be for those options, but not in a threatening or coercive way. Ideally, we ultimately want the young person or the family, whoever you're dealing with, to be the final decision maker in how to move forward. Sometimes it's going to be more or less possible depending on the situation. Ultimately, though, we want to do this as much in collaboration with the person as possible, again, so that they are invested and they feel that sense of control. They feel also, again, that you're not just trying to overpower them or tell them what to do, but rather that this is something you're engaging in together. And then again, you want to be transparent. You want to communicate reasonable limits and boundaries clearly and respectfully, right? This person might be asking something of you that you cannot do. And so it sometimes can be tempting to be like, fine, I'll just do it. You might not be able to, right? And making promises that you can't keep, or, setting precedent for boundaries that are going to be a problem later is just going to, you might solve the short-term problem potentially, but it could, it can lead to other issues in the future. And it also is, this is a chance for us to sort of practice being boundaried and also validating and working with them. I cannot, like give you money, right? What I can do is I can work with you to see how I can help you get your needs met. I cannot, change the appointment time to the time you want. What I can do is give you a list of different options and see if there's ways that we can do to negotiate moving forward, right? So both being clear about what you can and cannot do, but then also where can you be flexible, right? This is the rule and the rule is the rule. Well, are we just doing that because the rule's the rule, or are there ways we can be flexible? And so being also willing to think about what we're able to offer to people. And then also, if you don't, if there's a higher authority that you need, like, I don't know if I can do this, I need to ask my supervisor, being clear about that as well. Like, I can check on this. I don't know what they're going to say, but I'm happy to advocate and check on things. So again, just always sort of being transparent. I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure we have time for our last activity. But I want to also give folks a chance to think about takeaways. So we just talked about key takeaways when it comes to And so just, I guess, brief thoughts about sort of what collaborative problem solving might look like, what you want to sort of take away from how you might do that going forward. So again, maybe take like, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to write down some thoughts. If folks want to share that in the chat, they're welcome to do so. And then we're going to move into our last strategy.
Yeah, and I think this one is very important to reflect on because earlier a lot of people are like, oh, I jumped to solutions too quickly. Sometimes I just want to really fix the situation. Really connecting the dots to really how will understanding the best ways of collaboration um, um, compared to what happens when you're more dysregulated. How do you build your self-awareness and your approaches when you're trying to collaborate to resolve and get to the end of an escalation? So yeah, thank you so much. And please feel free to share in the chat if you want to share any of your key takeaways as we move on.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to move on just for the sake of time, but I do want to please keep putting things in the chat as I keep talking. The last strategy is following up. And I know that sometimes like once a escalation or a crisis is over, we sometimes feel like we just want to move on and leave it behind for a number of different reasons. And yet like following up is a big part of also prevention, right? When we follow up after an escalation or after a crisis, it really is helpful in terms of preventing future crises and also integrating what we've learned from the situation so that we can move forward with that person and even grow from it or heal from it or have, improve their abilities and skills to manage these moments of high stress in the future. So you may have one follow-up conversation, but you often will have more than one conversation. And these could be with the young person themselves. There also might be ones that are amongst your team, you and your supervisor, you and your colleagues. So there can be sort of on the staff side, there might be some follow-up conversations and debriefing. And then that also might happen with the young person. It could also, might facilitate follow-up conversations between the young person and other people. If you're working in a school with partners, so like, teachers or security guards or whoever was involved. And you also may end up facilitating conversations between caregiver and, young person. So there's a number of different permutations of people that you might end up facilitating these conversations with. Or having these conversations with. There's three sort of things that you might do in these follow-up conversations. It all may happen in the same conversations, or they might happen in different conversations. The first is debriefing. There's also going to be aspects of relational repair that happen, and then also future planning. So debriefing means essentially assessing and processing what led up to the escalation and what happened during the escalation. So all those risk and protective factors that we talked about, what role are those playing? And then also what was done during the escalation or in the lead up to the escalation that was helpful or maybe less helpful in terms of bringing people back and creating safety and avoiding crisis. That's sort of the debriefing. It's really going through what happened and coming to a consensus, sharing perspective of like what happened. Okay, this is what I experienced and this is what I saw happening. This is what I thought about whether it was useful or not. This is what affected me, etc. Again, you may do this as a group of staff, right, with colleagues or with your supervisor, and you also will often do it with the person themselves or with, again, those other collaterals that are involved. The thing that goes hand in hand with debriefing is that future planning, right? So this is what happened, this is what worked well and didn't well. What does that mean for next time or for going forward, right? So it's taking all the things you learned from the debriefing and creating a plan. So maybe you identified factors that contributed to the escalation. How are you going to address those factors, right? How can we strengthen those protective factors or address those risk factors, again, to sort of, prevent future crisis, future escalation? What are you going to do the same next time or differently next time? And what do you need to make that happen? Maybe what didn't work is that we as a team didn't communicate. Well, how are we going to create a communication system as a team that can help to be more helpful going forward, right? maybe, and it's again, and these conversations are going to look different based on whether you're talking about, are you future planning with your colleagues, or are you future planning with the young person? Sometimes it also means, okay, maybe this means about learning regulation strategies that this young person can use in the future, right? So what is the plan going forward? And also, what can we learn from what happened? The last part, and I think this is an important part that sometimes gets forgotten, is about the relational repair that may happen, that can happen or needs to happen rather, after an escalation. So there may have been things that happened during an escalation, during a crisis, that caused harm, right? To you, to the client, to other people in the vicinity, to caregivers, other people. And you may have lingering feelings, and they may have lingering feelings about what happened that were not resolved in the moment. So, maybe a client called you, right, really late at night, and then you didn't answer, and there was an escalation about it. And, you maybe said, hey, like, I'm not available to you late at night. And they say, well, when you say that you're not available to me, it makes me feel really alone and abandoned, right? That might be something they need to communicate to you that they couldn't communicate in the moment. This is a chance for you to share your perspective of, like, this is what my intentions were, and also to acknowledge maybe harm, right? When you said you couldn't help me with blah, 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 it hurt my feelings. And you can say, like, this is why I said that. And also I acknowledge that I hurt your feelings and that didn't feel good. It's a chance for you to really respond in a variety of ways, but to preserve that relationship, because you don't want things to fester and then again for that to cause another escalation or another crisis in the future. You can, even if you're not a therapist, you can always share your intention and acknowledge the impact of what you did, or what you said. And then similarly for you, you can talk about how you all interacted and how that impacted you from, again, perspective of being client focused, but again, sharing those things. This is really important, again, to maintain that relationship, but also doing these conversations can be so healing for a young person or anybody really who may in the past have internalized these kinds of things and really inward and developed shame around them, right? So a lot of times the folks we work with think that one bad interaction or one screw up or whatever it is means the end of a relationship. And in the past, that may have actually been the case, right? We got in a fight and we never talked again. I, said something to, I had a blow up on my foster parent and I lost that placement and I was moved to a different placement, right? There are many times where the folks we work with may have learned through their interactions that, I'm somebody who can't control my temper, I blow up all the time, etc. And so repair can help them to learn, like, sometimes, yeah, we might have a hard interaction and we can continue this relationship. And that is so healing. It helps build those neural pathways to help them to learn there's another way of interacting. And so can be really healing, right? Yes, you yelled at me and you called me all sorts of names. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to work with you or your child anymore, right? I'm going to keep working with you. We're going to talk about how we can relate better in the future. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to show up for you anymore. Okay, we have about 20 minutes left. Before we move into our practice, though, I don't know that we have like a specific time built in here for reflection, but I'm wondering if anyone wants to share any thoughts or feelings about sort of anything we talked about the follow-up. I'm seeing people talking about this cannot be an opportunity for growth. What can be improved. I also see people really offering some great resources, which I love. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, so in our last 20 minutes, we are going to do a practice. I'm going to start moving into that, or maybe Dan, you can introduce
So
us to the practice.
we're really going to start to pull together all the skills we reviewed and watch a video of an interaction between a young person and two different adults. The video takes place in a school in the 90s, actually, but the lessons we can learn from the scenario are generalizable to other settings, and we encourage you to think about how these skills might look similar or different in your workplace. And so before we start the video, we just want to give you some things to look out for regarding the scenario is going to play out, and encourage you to take notes during the video so we can share them later. And we want everyone to take note of any first pre-existing factors in this upcoming video that really can increase the risk of escalation between the student and his teacher. This is for everyone to really hone in on. And then we're going to divide you into groups. We want you to evaluate how did the adults involved in the situation respond to the student? What did they do well? What about the responses could be improved? So if you're winter, you're going to focus on self-regulation. If you are spring, how do they do in terms of approaching mindfully? If you're summer, what about building alliance? And if you're a fall, how do they work on collaborating on a solution? And so part of it is really make sure that you can really understand what happens when you specifically focus on all these things and see how you can grow. So I'm going to share the screen now. Can everyone see it?
The boxes are still there, Dan.
Okay, hold on. 1 second. How about now?
Yep, great.
All right, let's get there. Being the principal means being consistent, being fair, and about communication. Not a bad idea, though. You have to have a really good sense of humor to be successful with this.
Show you. Watch right here.
Okay, he's looking around, walks right up. Look at this.
What?
He puts the gum right directly on the camera. Thinks that nobody's going to see him. That's unbelievable. Sometimes it's not always fun. These are young people, and so we do have rules. Let's go. No hats. Basic rule. We like to think that you're in school to learn. That's just one of the rules that we're trying to work with.
He took my hat. My hat was on the table. It was now on my head. Why would I walk around and put a hat on my head?
Let me go up and see him. You wait here.
This student is angry that his hat was confiscated by one of his teachers. A minor incident at some schools.
How we doing?
But at Madison Park, Chuck McAfee knows things can quickly spin out of control.
I put my hat on the table. Other teachers didn't have a problem with that. Why did he have a problem with it?
Little issues that's going on here that I'm not getting.
It reflected me.
See, I mean, I'm trying to figure this out. There's always two sides of the stories. I mean, I cannot imagine why someone come down to my office about just his hat. If he wasn't wearing his hat, why would the teacher take my hat? I don't know.
He had his hat. He left his hat in a place it wasn't supposed to be. I took his hat.
What's the point?
He doesn't really perform at any kind of acceptable level. He caught a real nasty attitude about it.
Why want to leave school?
Yeah, I know. He can relax about his hat and get his hat at the end of the school day.
Or you said at lunchtime?
Well, see, I'm at lunchtime if I'm a nice guy and you don't treat me bad. When you leave
Did he say
here,
anything?
yeah, he called me all kinds of names. He was swearing at me and everything before he was leaving. He called, no, you know me, but before he left here, I was all kinds of, MFAS type
Oh, I
stuff.
see. All right. How we doing? Come on. Please. How we doing?
The longer you do this, you get a sixth sense. If I get it right, I'm going to find out the root of the problem.
I almost my hat back.
All right, here's what I want to tell you. Now, how old are you?
I'm 18.
And see, that's the tough part. And when you get 18, you're like grown, and it's hard to deal with you because you're a young adult.
I mean, if my hat was small enough to fit in my pocket, I would put it in my pocket. Now, he's just trying to do this to show me that he got power over me, this and
That's
that.
what I thought it was. Obviously, you got upset. That's what I thought. That's what I got. All right. I was trying to figure out what was this about. It's not about the hat. You feel like you didn't get that much respect. All right, come on. I want to try to keep you in school, so I got the point. The teacher got the point. You got the point. We have to straighten this out with you, teacher.
Put my hat.
Hold on. We're not finished. Don't walk away.
I'm going home, yo. Come on, man.
Don't go home over your hat. Hold on.
Yo,
I just know from experience, sometimes these little things can turn into bigger things if you don't do the right thing. This is your third high school. I'm trying to make sure that this year is somehow successful.
because you're going to get an education. All right, let me bring you over here. Let me go get your hat.
Principal McAfee convinces this angry student to sit down with the teacher who took away his hat and try to work it out.
Hi, this is Mr. Wilkins.
I want these two people to communicate and solve their problem.
Anything to say?
Yeah. How come you only decide to take my hat, comment her hat on the table, and then rather than that you could just be like, yo, Will, put the hat in the locker.
I don't like that tone. I don't like that tone.
That's the tone you're gonna get if you're gonna do something
No,
like
that's
that.
not the tone I'm gonna get because you're not following the rules. If the hat is sitting over, I'm gonna say.
Where I come from, yo, adult, no adult, yo, if you're gonna treat somebody like that, how you expect me to talk to you?
Okay, Wilkins, here's the deal. Here's the deal. The rule is no hats. If I find out, the rule is no hats.
Hey, yo, man, what the man? You really begin to piss me off, dog. You're over here running your mouth, doing this thing, thinking that's your rules, this and that. Listen to me closely, all right? I don't care about you. I don't give two about you. All I wanted was my damn hat. You had no right to take my hat off no table. If I put my hat on the table, you have the right to be like, well, I don't want that hat there. Put it in the locker. I don't put it in the damn locker. All right, ask somebody so I can put it in the locker. You don't come up to my face. Now let go of me. Yo, don't put your hands on me. William, come on. Yo, what the hell, man? What the hell, man?
It's a tough world out there for young people. They feel very vulnerable. When they feel disrespected, we're in a lot of trouble. They do things sometimes that don't make any sense.
Sometimes it's so easy,
You
in
know,
my end.
you're dealing with young people.
Didn't have to explode.
What window is that?
After his attempt to make peace between teacher and student backfires, Chuck McAfee has to clean up the mess.
You got to see his hand. He needs a nurse. See his hand. He's going to have to end up having to pay for this. This way.
When things really mess up, it's my fault.
Hold your hand up.
The buck stops here.
Okay. What happened?
I'm trying to talk to him, but he refused to let me talk. And then he get me aggravated because he's talking to me like I'm a first grader.
All right, so now you're aggravated. So then you turn around, get mad, and punch the window?
Yeah. He making it seem like I'm stupid.
Okay.
You need a stitch in it.
I want to pay for the window. Listen, my mom can't pay for that window. I got 5 little brothers. And my mom work at 2 jobs, and she can't hardly pay the rent.
Then wait a minute. Then we'll probably talk about some kind of restitution. We'll find a way. All right?
Thank you.
Okay.
It's very hard to be a teacher because they deal with everything, but they got the heart to.
All right, everybody. So thanks for being a really active viewer. I see some people were really already starting to put things into the chat box and understanding that there are some really big challenges that they're going through in that school. Oh, sorry. Jack, if you can just continue my screen, just like did something weird.
Oh, sure. You want me to share?
Yeah.
Sure. Quick. Let me just go into slideshow mode. Yeah, hold on.
Wait, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Okay. So people were already starting to share in the chat box, but understand what were some of those pre-existing conditions and factors that you saw. All right. Oh, as the teacher noted, as noticed, hard to be a teacher, principal, even a student. Single mom, 5 brothers. Mom had 2 jobs, parentified child. The idea of what is in the school system, right? The teacher, the role of the teacher, the principal, different moves to different schools, previous tension, the teacher's own trauma, right? Arguing with the child over a hat. there's a lack of staying leveled and regulated in so many different ways. And I think we're all starting to see the impact of what happens when multiple people are dysregulated. And so one of the things that we want to offer you, offer you is to really think about the adults in the room. And so we're not going to be reviewing the Padlet, but we will be sharing the Padlet in the chat box for you to just be able to fill out. And then once you fill out your answers, we can post them afterward for you to look at everyone else's answers when the recording comes out. So the links are in the chat box. Put in your answers about self-regulation, approaching mindfully, building on alliance, collaborating on a solution. And then you can continue the conversations after this training for another day or so to really think through the way that the adults reacted and what could be improved. And so for now, in the chat box, please share your responses about what the adults could have done to improve. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I see already not allowing the student to explain the situation, addressing those risk factors, things people said in terms of the mindful approach, right? So tone, the sort of physical space was not maybe attended to. People are talking about who's in the room, whether the principal decided to be there or not. In terms of self-regulation, I feel like the people talking about the teacher not being regulated and wanting control, looking to exert power over the student, and also not reflecting on his own role, right? Until maybe the end where he says, I guess I don't know if we saw the very end of that, but teacher making clear it was a personal issue, right? Saying he doesn't perform any kind of level. It wasn't really about the hat. The young person having a lot to deal with at home and schools, transferring to different schools. In terms of validating, there would have been helpful to validate, allowing him to speak and express himself, leaving the issue and allowing to later, right? Drawing out that time and allowing people time to get regulated, and then having sort of more of those conversations about what they're going to do going forward. Again, they tried to do problem solving too early, right? Principal could have potentially sat in on the conversation, right? So maybe there could have been somebody who helped to facilitate that conversation, listening to react rather than to reach a solution. Whereas the principal got the student to a point where he was willing to sit down and talk. And maybe that has to do with their prior relationship, and maybe it doesn't. So we're now going to also talk again in our last couple minutes about what a debrief might look like in this situation. So we've already started doing a debrief, right? We've talked about what happened and we've talked about what could have gone differently, but I'll now want you to put on the hat of what would it be like if these were your colleagues or these were your supervisees, right? So how might you help these, if we're thinking about how do you even do a debrief or a follow-up conversation, we'd like you to think about how would you help the teacher and the principal in this conversation, in this situation, to reflect on and assess what went well and what didn't go well. And then again, so let's start with that, I guess. How would you help them to reflect?
Take this class. Thanks, Denny. Release negative emotions, gain new insights, really thinking about different ways to do it. Sharing oh wow, what's okay versus what's not okay in these situations. Can we take a step back to reevaluate the way that our perspectives inform our responses? What are the worries that we have during really difficult situations?
Great.
Even for the second question, follow-up conversations, someone mentioned the school counselor could do a facilitation, and maybe that's what happens. We set up a meeting with the school counselor and you and the teacher and the principal. What does that look like?
Yeah, offering resources, I think, is a really important thing. And again, it's sort of taking that trauma lens, assuming people are in need of support rather than in need of punishment or correction all the time. I also see people again suggesting, as you're saying, Dan, other follow-up conversations. People are talking about, you know, maybe that follow-up conversations with the student about how to address some of those risk factors. And I'm wondering, again, what are sort of the next steps that you all might recommend to this team in terms of improving crisis management and de-escalation? Resources and training, role-playing, trauma-sensitive schools. Oh, yeah. I like that what David's saying about the teacher doesn't really like to be singled out, right? It's a hard thing to reflect on one person, but what can we do as a team might be a better way to approach this follow-up conversation. I like that. Building relationships and creating opportunities to build relationships. Peer advocate services, restorative justice practices. Yes.
So we're thinking now, like, we're in this kind of crisis prevention stage again after the crisis happens, and we're like, and I see people like, I'm gonna actually help some of the student learn self-regulation skills. I'm gonna talk to the teacher about their own self-regulation. I'm gonna try to connect the student to better community spaces and understand how to impact the school system. I'm gonna really work on, like, what does it mean to be in the community, right? As a student doing these types of things in a school that's under-resourced perhaps. So really, I'm starting to really tailor my future interventions and strategies based on this scenario and using the strategies we discussed in the first part of the presentation. So really, thank you for really thinking about identifying the strengths and building on that.
So we only have 2 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to sort of, I think that in the interest of time, what maybe Dan and I will do is we will attend to the questions that folks ask throughout the chat and maybe post something when we post the slides so we can answer those questions and get to them so we're not rushing through them. The other thing is, so if you have any questions that were not answered right now, please put those in the chat. We can add those to what we attend to, so we can have sort of a written response that that we are able to post. The one thing I really do want to make sure we take some time for in the last sort of minute that we are here is for our post survey. So this, you know, is a new training for us, and we're doing using a lot of different new tools, the Padlet and the Poll Everywhere in particular. We'd really like to hear about how that went for you all, if you felt that was effective, what you feel like we could do differently. So I know we're about ending, but if you could all take a chance to fill out this final survey so that we know what we can do better next time. I also want to use this chance while you all are filling out that survey to promote our next offering, which is going to be on February 5th, which is Understanding and Addressing Childhood Aggressive Behavior. Our presenter is Dr. Ross Green. We're very excited to host him. And thank you all so much for attending today. I know there were so many of you here. Please go to our website and look at our past trainings, and we look forward to seeing you all at future trainings. We have our, if there are any questions that you feel like don't get answered or you want to know more about our future trainings, please reach out to us at this email address here, ctac.info@nyu.edu. And again, thank you all so much for all of your participation. We really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you at a training in the future. Dan, anything else you want to add? Oh, and instructions for CEs will be emailed to you. They will, I believe, you get emailed CE instructions within about the next day, and then you can go to Silver's website and you can put in your information. You'll create an account. I went over in this beginning, but if you missed it, you'll be creating an account and then you'll be able to apply. So you'll expect an email in your box with instructions about how to access your CEs for this. And again, you know, if you were here, you had to be here 75% of the time and it logged on with your own Zoom link in order to be eligible. And those are for licensed social workers, clinical social workers, and mental health counselors.
And really, thank you. After all of this, I see some of you are continuing to put stuff in the Padlet, which is really nice. Continue those interactions, and I hope to see you at a future training with us.